Chapter 31, The Silent Audit. District 4 Subterranean Yard, 2 a.m. The heavy air inside the sorting yard tasted of burnt copper, sulfur, and stagnant dampness. High above, suspended from rusted steel girders, dim yellow halogen lamps flickered, casting long, jittery shadows across mountains of discarded circuitry, shattered engine blocks, and unexploded ordnance. Dozens of children, some no older than 6 or 7, moved like silent ghosts through the trash heaps, tossing scrap metal into heavy iron buckets. No one spoke. In Meteor City, speech was a luxury that drew the guards' batons. You knelt beside a pile of rusted copper wire, picking through the metal with methodical slowness. To the mercenary guards lounging on the high catwalks with assault rifles, you were just another frail, hollow-eyed orphan terrified into compliance. But behind your filthy hair and smudge-stained face, your mind was working like a high-speed quantum processor. Facility map and tactical analysis. Facility layout, converted pre-war subterranean train station. Perimeter, single reinforced iron main gate. Hostage sector, disused freight elevator shaft. Enemy forces 14 mercenaries. -3 Nen bodyguards. Gaston, the sifter. Phase 1. Mapping the network. Without raising your head, you activated Gyo at a microscopic, almost imperceptible output, just enough to sharpen your vision without casting a visible aura glare that could alert Gaston's bodyguards. Faint, translucent lines of life force flickered through the dim lighting. 10 meters away, 2 of Gaston's Nen-trained bodyguards were leaning against an old ticket booth, playing cards. Their aura control was crude, leaking freely from their shoulders like hot steam, a clear sign of poorly trained, self-taught street fighters. Enhancer types, you noted mentally. High physical strength, terrible zetsu, predictable linear movement. Further back, near a reinforced steel door leading to the upper office, sat Gaston, the sifter. Through your subtle Gyo, you observed his aura. Unlike his muscle-bound goons, Gaston possessed a slick, unstable aura that clung to his skin like boiling oil. His aura had a yellowish, acidic tint to it, transmutation focused on corrosive properties. Acidic transmutation, your transmigrator database processed calmly. High lethality at close range, dangerous against skin and soft armor. But extremely limited in reach. Secret Hatsu, Chronicle Index Update. Target, Gaston, the sifter. Empathic, Tactical Resonance, Level 2. Analysis, uses acidic aura to corrode vault locks and dissolve evidence. Extremely vulnerable to medium-range spatial barriers. Phase 2, disabling the internal grid. At 3:30 a.m., the shift horn blared, a harsh, screeching siren that signaled a 15-minute water break for the child laborers. The guards relaxed their posture, lighting cigarettes and talking loudly about their upcoming payout in Yorknew. Using the chaotic movement of children crowding toward the water trough, you slipped away. Moving in absolute, flawless zetsu, you melted into the pitch-black shadows beneath the main conveyor belt. You moved like a phantom, your boots making zero sound against the oily concrete floor. In 3 minutes, you reached the central power junction box near the main hydraulic gate. You pulled a small, thin copper pin from your pocket, salvaged from the trash pile 10 minutes prior. Extending a microfilament of shoe into the pin, you jammed it cleanly between the primary transformer coils of the hydraulic lock mechanism. Spark. A tiny, silent short circuit fused the internal gears together from the inside out. The main gate was now permanently locked in the open position, preventing Gaston from trapping everyone inside once the alarm sounded. Next, you reached into your rags, pulled out Kale's radio frequency tracer, and pressed the small rubber toggle twice. Click click. The silent signal was transmitted straight to Kale's receiver on the surface. Phase 3, the spark. Above the sorting yard, the heavy concrete ceiling suddenly shuddered. Boom! A localized, concentrated explosive charge detonated directly above the main ventilation shaft, showering the sorting yard in a cascade of pulverized concrete, dust, and twisted iron. The halogen lights violently shattered, plunging the subterranean station into pitch darkness. What the hell? A mercenary screamed, charging his rifle bolt in the dark. Alarm! It's an attack! Gaston, the ceiling's coming down, another shouted in sheer panic. In the blinding cloud of grey dust and darkness, while mercenaries stumbled blindly and fired random warning shots into the air, a calm, razor-sharp voice echoed from the high catwalks. Search and seize. Kale's voice cut through the chaos like a frozen blade. You stood up from the shadows beneath the conveyor belt. With zero hesitation, you reached for your forearms, feeling the cold, reassuring weight of your conjured iron and oak braces beneath your filthy sleeves. The distraction was laid. Kale was down. Now, it was time for the child spy to secure the exits. Panic erupted through the subterranean vault like wildfire. While the frightened children scrambled toward the shadows under the broken conveyor belts, you bounded up the rusted iron scaffolding toward the western freight exit, the designated rescue route. Move, all of you, toward the train tunnel. Now, you commanded, dropping the mute act entirely. Your voice was clear, authoritative, and impossibly calm amidst the gunfire. You crossed your forearms, snapping into a deep, rooted stance. Oakhaven Aegis. Clang. With a resonant, metallic ring, the antique iron and oak braces materialized. A massive, shimmering hexagonal barrier of silver-gray aura erupted in front of the tunnel entrance, completely shielding the fleeing children from a volley of stray automatic fire. The bullets flattened against your barrier like thrown pebbles, falling uselessly to the dirt. The reinforcements arrive. Just as the last child cleared the doorway, the heavy steel reinforced walls on the eastern side of the station buckled inward with a deafening screech. Crash. 4 more Nen users, Gaston's high-tier mafia reinforcements, who had been resting in the upper quarters, flooded into the dusty arena. Among them was an enormous enhancer carrying a concrete-filled pillar, and a transmuter whose aura crackled with superheated steam. They immediately flanked Kale, joining Gaston and his 2 surviving bodyguards. 6 Nen users against 1. You brought a single kid to raid my stronghold, Hunter, Gaston screamed, his face contorted in rage. Acidic, yellow aura bubbled off his arms, dripping onto the concrete and eating through steel pipes with a terrifying hiss. Kill him, melt his bones. The air in the subterranean station grew suffocatingly thick with hostile aura. The pressure was enormous, enough to crush a normal human's lungs. Kale stood in the very center of the kill zone, completely surrounded. His dark glasses had shattered in the initial breach, revealing cold, razor-sharp gray eyes that held zero fear. Ren, Kale said softly, his voice carrying clearly over the roar of Gaston's acidic aura. Keep the exit secure. Don't let anyone step past your shield. Understood, Instructor, you replied, locking your heels firmly into the stone floor, your aegis glowing bright. The reveal, Kale's true Hatsu. For as long as you had trained under Kale, he had only taught you the absolute fundamentals, Ten, Zetsu, Ren, Gyo, Ru. He was a master of basic combat, but he had never once shown you his personal, specialized Nen ability. Until tonight. Kale reached into his long coat, pulling out two simple, unadorned steel needles, the kind used by military surgeons. He didn't point them at the enemy. Instead, he drove both needles directly into his own forearms. He exhaled a long, steady breath. His nodes didn't burst open with chaotic energy. Instead, his aura suddenly vanished from sight. It didn't dissipate into Zetsu, it was forcefully compressed, pulled inward toward his heart until his entire body began to emit a soft, iridescent, ink-black sheen. HATSU Profile, Kale's private ability. Name, the Sovereign's Thread, Black Symphony. Nen types, Manipulation Emission. Mechanics. 1. Needle Anchor. Kale uses surgical needles driven into his own pressure points to override his body's natural limits, converting 100% of his life energy into absolute kinetic vector control. 2. Thread Manipulation. Kale emits micro-thin, invisible strands of aura thread that lock onto the vector lines of incoming attacks, redirecting kinetic energy back at his opponents with zero loss of momentum. What is that? Gaston stammered, stepping back as his acidic aura flickered erratically under the sheer density of Kale's compressed energy. The giant enhancer roared, leaping into the air and swinging the massive concrete pillar downward with enough force to shatter the entire floor. Die. Kale didn't dodge. He didn't even raise her arm to block. He simply flicked his wrist. Zip. Almost invisible black threads of emitted aura spun out into the air, wrapping instantly around the giant concrete pillar mid-swing. In a terrifying display of absolute manipulation, the immense downward force of the strike was completely caught in mid-air, rotated 180 degrees in a fraction of a millisecond, and sent crashing backward into the enhancer's own chest. Thunderous boom. The giant was hurled backward across the cavernous room, smashing through 3 solid concrete pillars before collapsing into a motionless heap. A master at work. What followed was not a fight. It was an absolute masterclass in lethal efficiency. The transmuter blasted a torrent of scalding steam toward Kale. Kale danced through the cloud like a shadow, his black aura threads catching the thermal vectors, twisting the hot air into a spinning vortex, and flinging it straight back at Gaston's remaining bodyguards. They screamed as their own allies' attack engulfed them. Gaston, terrified and desperate, lunged forward, throwing a violent, wide arc of bubbling acidic aura directly at Kale's face. "Die-you bastard." Kale sidestepped by a mere hair's breadth. His hand shot forward, 2 fingers coated in concentrated piercing straight through Gaston's acid shroud and tapping the man lightly on the collarbone. A single needle slid into Gaston's neck. Instantly, Gaston froze mid-air, his acidic aura extinguishing like a candle in a hurricane. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he realized his body was no longer under his own control. "Your movement is slovenly," Kale whispered, stepping past the paralyzed mafia boss. "Your aura lacks discipline, and your business in Meteor City is finished." With a flick of Kale's finger, Gaston was thrown forcefully against the wall, bound tightly from head to toe by invisible strands of restrictive aura threads, completely immobilized. The silent witness. The fight had lasted less than 45 seconds. The entire subterranean station was dead silent, save for the crackle of broken electrical wires and the faint dripping of water from the ceiling. From your position at the exit, maintaining the steady, unbroken barrier of your Oakhaven Aegis, your transmigrator mind recorded every single movement, every thread vector, and every emotional drop in Kale's execution. Deep within your soul, your secret specialist ability, the Chronicle of the Departed, silently updated. Chronicle Index Update. Target: Kale. New Mastery Access: The Sovereign's Thread, Black Symphony. Empathic, Tactical Resonance, Level 3. You had spent years training under Kale, understanding his philosophy, his quiet burdens, his protective nature, and his absolute devotion to fundamentals. Now that you had witnessed his true Hatsu in action, its blueprint was permanently, perfectly engraved into your specialist vault. Kale straightened his coat, pulled the surgical needles out of his own arms, and let out a quiet sigh as his black aura dissolved back into a gentle 10. He turned to look at you, offering a small, tired nod. Exit secure, Ren. You unsummoned your braces, bowing respectfully. 0 casualties, Instructor Kale. The children are safe in the tunnel. Good, Kale said, pulling a new pair of dark glasses from his pocket and slipping them over his eyes. Let's clean up this trash and get out of Meteor City before the elders arrive. Chapter 32, The Price of the Thread. District 4 Sanctuary, 4:30 a.m. The rain had finally begun to fall over the trash mountains of Meteor City, turning the toxic dust into a thick, black mud that slicked the narrow alleyways. Under the cover of the downpour, you and Kale ushered 32 shivering children through the heavy oak doors of an old, stone church nestled deep within an abandoned residential sector. This was St. Jude's Sanctuary, run by Father Thomas, a weary, middle-aged former hunter who had abandoned the association years ago to care for the forgotten children of the slums. Get them warm, Thomas, Kale said quietly, handing a thick stack of mafia currency to the old priest. Gaston's facility is destroyed, but the syndicate's main branch hasn't been cut off yet. We still have to track the supply line back to the elders' black market. You look terrible, Kale, Father Thomas murmured, taking the money with a heavy sigh. Did you use that ability again? Kale didn't answer. He turned on his heel and walked out into the cold, wet courtyard. The toll of the vow. You followed Kale out into the rain, your Zetsu active, your eyes sharp. You watched his back closely. During the battle in the underground station, Kale had overwhelmed 6 Nen users, including Gaston, in less than 45 seconds using the Sovereign's Thread, Black Symphony. It had looked like godlike, effortless kinetic control. But in the universe of Nen, absolute power always demands an equal price. As soon as you turned the corner into a dark, secluded alley behind the church, Kale's legs buckled. Thud. He slammed against the damp brick wall, sliding down into the mud. His breathing was ragged, gasping for air as if his lungs were collapsing from the inside out. Instructor, you rushed forward, crouching beside him. Stay back, Ren, Kale rasped, his teeth gritted in sheer agony. Through your subtle gyo, you looked at Kale's body, and what you saw sent a chill through your transmigrator mind. The recoil, Kale's vow and limitation backlash. The conditional bind. To force his emitted aura threads to manipulate external kinetic vectors without a physical medium, Kale must drive surgical needles directly into his own meridians, forcing his aura into a state of hypercompression. The side effect. 1. Internal nerve paralysis. Once the needles are removed, Kale's entire central nervous system suffers severe motor nerve spasms for 12 hours. 2. Forced aura lock. His aura nodes automatically snap shut into an involuntary, absolute ZETSU. He cannot use a single drop of Nen. 3. Physical hemorrhaging. The sheer kinetic force redirected through his body causes internal capillary micro-tears along his forearms and chest. Dark blood seeped through Kale's sleeves, staining the damp gravel beneath him. His face was ash white, his body trembling uncontrollably as his central nervous system revolted against the unnatural strain. For the next 12 hours, Kale was not a double-star tier combatant. He was completely defenseless, a normal human in an absolute state of forced zetsu. The mentor's vulnerability. Now you know, Kale muttered through blood-flecked lips, leaning his head against the cold brick. He forced a grim, self-deprecating smile. Why I rarely use that hatsu. The stronger the thread, the harder the backlash pulls back. He looked up at you through his rain-streaked, cracked dark glasses. Gaston was just a middleman, Ren. The true leaders of the syndicate, they're tracking our trail right now. They know someone raided the sorting yard. He reached into his pocket with trembling, paralyzed fingers, trying to pull out his radio transmitter, but his hand failed him, dropping the device into the mud. You picked up the transmitter, wiping the wet dirt from its casing, and looked down at your instructor. In your past life, you had seen adults crumble under pressure. In this world, you had seen Jing treat danger like a game and Kale act like an unshakable wall. But right now, Kale was vulnerable, bleeding, and entirely dependent on an 11-year-old child. The vessel takes the stage. You knelt beside Kale, taking his arm and slinging it over your small but dense shoulders. With surprising, steady physical strength, you lifted him off the muddy ground and dragged him toward a hidden, disused boiler room beneath the alley. Rest, Instructor Kale, you said, your voice completely flat, calm, and void of panic. Your 12 hours start now. Ren, the Syndicate's tracking squad. Kale managed to choke out as you propped him against a dry corner of the boiler room. If they find us while I'm locked in Zetsu. You reached to your wrists, feeling the cool iron of your conjured braces under your sleeves. They won't find you, you replied softly, stepping back toward the entrance of the boiler room. And if they do, they'll have to go through the shield first. You closed the rusted iron door, leaving Kale in the dark to recover. Standing out in the cold rain of Meteor City, with the night sky glowing faint crimson from the distant burning trash heaps, your transmigrator mind recalculated the entire operation. Kale was out of commission for 12 hours. The Syndicate was on the move. You were a 12-year-old child carrying a public tank shield hatsu, an unshakable foundation, and a secret specialist library that had just recorded Kale's lethal thread techniques. The hunt wasn't over. It was time for the apprentice to protect the master. Chapter 33, Night of the Unseen Guard. District 4, 5:15 a.m. The rain poured heavily, washing grey ash down the rusting iron walls of the alleyways. Inside the damp, hidden boiler room, Kale's ragged breathing stabilized into a deep, unconscious sleep, his body completely locked in involuntary, absolute zetsu as his nervous system repaired itself from the brutal backlash. Outside, you stood on the rusted fire escape of a 4-story abandoned tenement directly across from the boiler room entrance. Wrapped in your dark, soaked poncho, you sat cross-legged on the slick iron mesh. To any passerby or stray gang scout, You were nothing more than a discarded rag blowing in the storm. You were in absolute Zetsu. Not a single thread of aura leaked from your pores. Your heartbeat dropped to a slow, rhythmic 35 beats per minute. Your body temperature adjusted to match the freezing morning rain. The Transmigrator's meditation. In the deep, quiet vault of your post-mortem soul, you weren't just waiting, you were processing. Database integration. Kale's kinetic vector threads. Skill Reso copy profile. The Sovereign's thread, Black Symphony. Replication accuracy, 95%. Transmigrator advantage. Because your specialist aura is fueled by dual postmortem energy, you do not suffer Kale's severe conditional nerve damage or 12-hour forced Zetsu backlash. Your aura capacity absorbs the recoil smoothly. Strategic decision. Do not use it publicly. If you reveal Kale's private Hatsu in front of Mafia scouts or association spies, it will compromise Kale's identity and draw immediate suspicion to your specialist nature. Primary defense remains. Oakhaven Aegis plus flawless fundamentals. You opened your eyes, the silver glint of Gyo activating at a micro level across your pupils. Through the curtain of heavy rain, 3 distinct aura signatures entered the far end of District 4's central alleyway. The enforcers, syndicate cleaners. They moved with disciplined speed, not like Gaston's crude street thugs, but like trained underworld assassins sent by the Mafia elders to erase all witnesses before the Hunter Association could investigate the sorting yard raid. Threat evaluation, Syndicate Purge Team. Target 1, the Hound. Target 2, Iron Face. Target 3, Unnamed Scout. Goal, locate Gaston, execute survivors, purge St. Jude's orphanage. The manipulator scout stopped 50 meters from the boiler room, crouching down in the mud near the spot where Kale had collapsed earlier. He touched a blood-stained patch of wet gravel, his aura flaring slightly. Found it, the scout grunted, his voice carrying over the sound of rain. A hunter's blood. The scent is weak. His aura is completely gone. He's in forced Zetsu. He's hiding within a 100-meter radius, the enhancer muttered, cracking his iron-plated knuckles. Find the hole he crawled into and crush his head while he's helpless. The 3 men began fanning out, their eyes scanning the dark alcoves, abandoned basements, and boiler room doors. The wall in the dark. Inside the boiler room, Kale was entirely defenseless. One hit from an enhancer would shatter his skull before he could even wake up. You didn't feel panic. You felt the cold, crisp clarity that only comes from dying twice. You dropped silently from the 4-story fire escape, landing in the pitch-black alleyway 15 feet behind the tracking squad. Your feet made 0 splash against the flooded pavement, pure Zetsu coupled with perfect physical balance. Looking for someone, your 12-year-old voice echoed softly through the downpour. The 3 assassins spun around, their weapons drawing instantly. When their eyes landed on you, a small, drenched kid standing alone in the dark alleyway with a dark poncho wrapped around his shoulders, the enhancer let out a harsh, mocking laugh. A kid. Gaston's yard had rat traps, and this one escaped. The enhancer stepped forward, his body swelling as he activated a heavy layer of Ken. Get out of the way, brat, or I'll step on you. You didn't answer, you simply reached under your poncho and tapped your wrists together. Clang. The resonant, ancient sound of iron striking oak echoed through the narrow brick walls. The heavy, conjured braces of Oakhaven Aegis materialized on your forearms, glowing with a dense, shimmering silver-gray light. You dropped your left foot back, locking your heels firmly into the stone ground, and brought your arms up into a textbook, unbreakable rooted stance. Instructor Kale is resting, you said softly, your eyes burning with calm, absolute resolve. And this alley is closed. Tactical stance. ROOTED defense. Objective. Stall and neutralize the purge team for the next 6 hours. Strategy. Absorb all incoming emitter and enhancer attacks using Oakhaven Aegis. Force them into close quarters bottleneck. Specialist reserves, untouched. The emitter raised his hands, a glowing ball of crackling aura forming between his palms. Kill the brat. A beam of blinding energy surged down the narrow alleyway directly toward your chest. You didn't flinch, you didn't step back, and you didn't yield an inch of ground. The silver hexagonal barrier flared to life in the dark rain, and the trial of the silent guard began. Chapter 34, The Hunter Being Hunted. 5:20 a.m., minute 0. The emitter's aura blast tore through the curtains of rain, lighting up the narrow brick alley in a violent crimson glare. Boom! The explosive projectile slammed directly into your barrier. Thermal shockwaves blew the pooled water off the asphalt in a 10-meter ring, sending scalding steam billowing into the freezing morning air. Inside the flash, you didn't move a single millimeter. Your stance was anchored, the conjured iron and oak braces of Oakhaven Aegis absorbing the kinetic and thermal impact, channeling the energy down through your core and into the foundation beneath your boots. The shimmering, silver-gray hexagonal shield flickered, then hardened into pristine stability. Behind the smoke, the 3 assassins stared in utter disbelief. A 12-year-old absorbed a full output emitter blast without taking a step back, the manipulator scout hissed, his eyes widening. He's not a civilian kid. He's the hunter's apprentice. So what? The giant enhancer, Iron Face, roared, his body swelling as he pushed his Ken to its maximum output. He's just a defensive wall. A wall can't chase us. I'll break his arms, then we kill the master. Hour 1. The bottleneck strategy. 6 a.m. Iron Face charged down the alley like a runaway freight train, his boots shattering the damp cobblestones. He threw a right hook coated in dense, concentrated aimed straight at your face. You didn't dodge, you didn't panic. You angled your left bracker by 3 degrees, meeting his blow at the precise point of vector deflection. Thwack! The sound was like a sledgehammer striking an anvil. The sheer kinetic force of his strike was redirected into the brick wall beside you, causing half the masonry to collapse in a shower of red dust. Before Iron Face could pull his arm back, you shifted your aura distribution, or instantaneous 70/30ths Ru transition, feeding the silver energy from your shield directly into a swift, short-range elbow strike aimed straight at his exposed ribs. Crack! Iron Face gasped, stumbling backward as 2 of his ribs fractured. He looked at you with eyes full of shock, not just because of your physical density, but because of your absolute, cold efficiency. He's not just blocking, Iron Face spat, blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. He knows Ru. He's fighting like a 15-year veteran. You reset your stance smoothly, your breathing slow and measured. Defensive status, HOUR1. Aura reserves, 92%. Physical stamina, 95%. Objective, keep all 3 targets trapped in the 4-meter alley bottleneck. Time remaining, 11 hours until Kale's Zetsu lifts. Hours 2 and 3, the grind of endurance. 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. The sun rose behind thick, polluted rain clouds, casting a dim, sickly yellow light over Meteor City. The assassins quickly realized they couldn't breach your Oakhaven Aegis head-on. The alley was too narrow, only 4 meters wide, meaning they couldn't flank you without climbing the slick, crumbling tenement walls, where your spatial awareness made them easy targets for swift counter-strikes. They changed tactics. The emitter took position 40 meters back, firing relentless, medium-range aura pulses every 30 seconds to drain your stamina and aura capacity. Meanwhile, the manipulator attempted to send subtle, aura-infused wire needles crawling along the wet ground beneath your sightline. They were trying to wage a war of attrition against a child. They didn't know who they were dealing with. With your gyo locked onto the wet ground, you casually crushed the manipulator's crawling needles under your heavy boots before they could reach your ankles. Every emitter blast that struck your silver hexagonal barrier was absorbed with minimal energy loss, thanks to the strict defensive vows bound to your public Hatsu. Patience, your transmigrator mind repeated like a quiet mantra. You had survived 2 deaths, months of Ging's chaotic torturous drills, and years of relentless physical conditioning under Kale. Holding a defensive choke point against 3 mid-tier mafia enforcers was not a crisis. It was a simple math equation. Hours 4 and 5, psychological warfare. 10:15 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. By the 5th hour, the rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle. The 3 assassins were visibly exhausted, their clothes drenched in sweat and rainwater, their aura pools draining from continuous, ineffective output. What the hell is this brat? The emitter panted, dropping to one knee as his hands trembled with fatigue. He hasn't taken a drink of water. He hasn't shifted his stance. His aura output hasn't dropped by a single %. He's a monster, the manipulator whispered, stepping back into the shadows of the main street. His eyes. Look at his eyes. Through the wet strands of filthy hair hanging over your forehead, your dark eyes stared back at them, completely unblinking, devoid of anger, devoid of fear, and utterly unreadable. To them, you were no longer a child protecting a master. You were an immovable, stone guardian that had consumed 5 hours of their lives without showing a single trace of human fatigue. Hour 6, the midday shift. 11:50 a.m. Inside the boiler room behind you, Kale remained locked in deep, unconscious sleep, 6 hours down, 6 hours to go. On the main street outside the alley, the distant sound of heavy engine revving began to echo through the trash heaps. The manipulator scout looked back toward the main road, a sudden, cruel grin breaking across his face. They're here, the scout laughed, wiping muddy rain from his eyes. The mafia elders sent the heavy transport unit, 6 more combatants with heavy ordnance. He pointed his finger at you, his voice shaking with desperate rage. You held out for 6 hours, kid, but let's see your little shield handle 3 rocket launchers and a full squad of Nen users. You didn't answer. You gently rotated your wrists, feeling the heavy iron braces click tightly into place under your sleeves. 6 hours were done. 6 hours remained. The hunter was still being hunted, and the real trial was just about to begin. Chapter 35, The Hunter Being Hunted. 1:30 p.m., Hour 8. The heavy rumble of diesel engines shook the mud beneath your boots. 2 armored transport trucks slammed into position at the mouth of the alley, blocking off the main street. Heavy iron grates hissed open, and 6 fresh, heavily armed combatants poured out into the drizzle, joining the 3 exhausted assassins you had spent the last 6 hours stonewalling. 9 enemies, 3 rocket-propelled grenade launchers. 2 enhancers, 3 emitters, 2 manipulators, and a pair of heavily armored mercenaries holding automatic combat shotguns. They didn't just hold the bottleneck anymore, they scaled the rusted fire escapes of the tenement buildings on both sides. Within 2 minutes, you were completely surrounded on 3 sides, trapped against the iron door of the boiler room. The limit. Your breath hitched slightly, coming out as small clouds of white steam in the cold rain. Your 12-year-old body was reaching its absolute physical boundary. Holding Oakhaven Aegis against non-stop emitter bombardments for over 6 hours had drained your reserves down to the red line. Your forearms beneath the heavy iron and oak braces were bruised purple, and every breath tasted of iron. "He's done," one of the fresh emitters on the roof shouted, aiming an RPG directly down at your head. "Look at his legs. The kid can barely stand." "Don't shoot the boiler room. We need the hunter alive for interrogation," the manipulator scout yelled from the ground. "Flush him out with crossfire. Turn him into minced meat." Inside the boiler room, Cale was still 4 hours away from waking up. If you stayed rooted in front of that iron door, an explosive shell from above would blow through your depleted shield, collapse the entrance, and bury Cale alive under 10 tons of wet brick. Face-to-face combat is suicide now, your mind calculated with icy, emotionless clarity. My public tank build has served its purpose. It's time to shift from the wall to the ghost. You were besieged, but you were not confined. The shift, absolute efficiency. You unsummoned Oakhaven Aegis. Clang, shush. The heavy iron braces dissolved into faint silver mist, instantly cutting the massive aura draw on your exhausted system. The mercenaries blinked in surprise. To them, it looked like the stubborn kid had finally broken and surrendered. He dropped his hatsu, the enhancer shouted, leaping down from the truck bed with his iron-plated fists raised. "Crush him." In that exact millisecond, as the giant enhancer dropped from the air and 3 shooters pulled their triggers, you snapped your nodes into a state so sharp, so absolute, it defied human logic. ZETSU. Your remaining 18% aura shivered, collapsed inward, and vanished into complete non-existence. To the thermal scopes and NEN perceptions of the 9 attackers, you vanished from reality. The hunt in the shadows. Swoosh. An RPG warhead slammed into the pavement where you had been standing half a second before, blowing a crater into the cobblestones and shrouding the alley in a blinding cloud of black smoke, shattered brick, and dust. "Did we get him?" a shooter yelled from the roof. "I can't feel his aura. He's dead." They were wrong. Using the blinding explosion as a cover, your light, agile 12-year-old frame had bounded off the falling brick rubble, scaled the wet pipe on the left tenement wall, and slipped silently through a shattered third-story window. You didn't use NEN to jump. You used pure, mechanical physical agility, the brutal muscle memory forged by Ging's high-altitude drills and Cale's martial forms. Inside the pitch-black, abandoned apartment, you crouched in the shadows. Your heartbeat dropped to a dead, silent crawl. Operational profile, SHADOW efficiency. Goal: neutralize or distract 9 targets for 3.5 hours using 0 hatsu. Method: stealth guerrilla takedowns, structural sabotage, zetsu ambush. Weapons: environmental scrap, razor wire, high ground advantage. 1 by 1. On the roof of the tenement, the emitter holding the empty RPG launcher lowered his weapon, peering into the smoke below. "Hey, Iron Face, did you see a body down there?" he called out. No one answered him from behind. A shadow detached itself from the water tower directly above him. You dropped silently onto his shoulders, your small hands wrapping around his throat in a tight, precise medical chokehold while your elbow drove straight into his cervical vertebra. Crack. Zero noise, zero aura footprint. Before the shooter could even gasp, you dragged his unconscious body into the empty water tower, salvaged his combat knife and 2 smoke grenades, and vanished back into the rain-slicked rafters. Down in the alley, the manipulator scout suddenly froze. He looked up at the quiet roof, his blood running cold. Target isn't dead, the scout whispered, his voice trembling violently as he realized the horrific truth. He didn't surrender. He dropped his shield so he could hunt us. From the dark, rain-soaked ruins of District 4, 2 dark eyes watched them from the high rafters. You tested the edge of the salvaged combat knife with your thumb. You were low on aura, your body was broken, and the odds were 9 to 1. 3 hours and 40 minutes left, you thought, stepping silently into the storm. Let's see who runs out of time first. Chapter 35, The Hunter Being Hunted. 2:15 p.m., Hour 9. The smoke from the RPG blast drifted away in the miserable drizzle, leaving a jagged, smoking crater where you had stood moments before. Down in the narrow alley, the remaining 8 mercenaries stood back to back, their rifles raised toward the crumbling facades of the surrounding tenements. The confidence that had carried them through the morning was gone, replaced by a cold, crawling dread. Where is he? The manipulator scout barked, his eyes darting frantically across the empty fire escapes. I can't pick up a trace, not a single micro drop of aura. He's a kid, damn it, one of the fresh emitters yelled, his weapon shaking in his wet hands. He was running on empty. How is he moving like this? They didn't understand the difference between someone who relied on raw power and someone who had built an unshakable foundation. You didn't need aura to be dangerous. You needed position, gravity, and timing. The guerrilla execution. High above on the 4th floor rusted ledge, you crouched in absolute, ghost-like zetsu. Your muscles screamed with deep fatigue, and cold rain trickled down your dirt-streaked neck. But your mind was as steady as a calm lake. In your small right hand, you held one of the salvaged smoke grenades pulled from the roof guard. In your left, a heavy, iron radiator pipe you had quieted with a strip of cloth. Target 2, the emitter on the roof ledge. You didn't use a flashy hatsu. You didn't drop your zetsu. You simply pulled the pin on the grenade with your teeth and let it fall. Clatter. The small metal canister bounced down the iron fire escape, landing right at the feet of the 2 shooters perched on the 2nd floor balcony. Grenade. PFFFFFFT. Thick, dense white smoke erupted in a blinding cloud, engulfing the balcony and spilling down into the narrow bottleneck below. Panicked shouts and blinded automatic gunfire instantly filled the smoke-filled air. Now. You dropped straight through the white cloud like a falling stone. Thwack. The iron pipe connected squarely with the back of the balcony shooter's knee, shattering the joint. As he screamed and buckled forward, you grabbed his tactical vest, using his falling momentum to swing yourself cleanly over the railing and into the shadowed hallway of the 3rd floor. Crash. Before the 2nd balcony guard could turn his rifle into the smoke, your foot drove straight into his sternum, propelling him backward over the edge. He plummeted 20 feet, landing heavily on top of the armored transport truck below with a sickening crunch. Purge Team Tracker, HOUR9. Remaining targets, 6/9 active combatants. Operative status, aura at 12%. Tactic, terrain exploitation, 0 aura exposure. Time remaining, 2 hours and 45 minutes until Kale's Zetsu lifts. psychological collapse. Down in the smoke-filled alley, total chaos took hold. He's in the smoke. Fire! Fire! The mercenaries panicked, unleashing wild volleys of automatic fire into the second-floor balcony, chewing through the rusted iron and crumbling brick. They were wasting ammunition, burning through their own aura, and tearing apart their own sightlines. Stop firing, you idiots! The manipulator scout screamed, holding his arms out. You're shooting the building. When the smoke finally cleared under the steady rain, 2 more of their squad lay incapacitated on the ground. There was no sign of you, only a single, small set of muddy boot prints leading out of a broken window on the 3rd floor. And then vanishing into thin air. The remaining 6 men stood in the wet, blood-stained alleyway, breathing heavily. He's running out of stamina. He has to be. He's just hiding until the hunter wakes up. He pointed at the heavy iron door of the boiler room 30 feet away, the door you had protected for 9 agonizing hours. We don't need to hunt the kid, the scout realized, a desperate, wicked grin spreading across his face. We just blow the door. If we kill the master, the kid's effort was for nothing. The scout grabbed the last remaining RPG warhead from the truck bed, locking it into the launcher tube. The last line. Inside the dark, damp boiler room behind that iron door, Kale's body remained motionless in forced zetsu, his internal meridian. Inside the 3rd floor apartment, sitting in the dark shadow beneath a collapsed doorway, you heard the mechanical click of the rocket launcher being armed below. Your eyes opened slowly. Your body was battered, your clothes were soaked through with freezing rain, and your aura capacity was hanging by a thread. But as you looked down at the iron door of the boiler room, 0 doubt entered your mind. You reached down to your wrists. Clang. Under your long, dark sleeves, the conjured iron and oak braces materialized once more, glowing with a soft, steady silver light. 2 hours and 15 minutes left, you whispered into the dark, rain-filled quiet of the tenement room. You stepped out onto the window sill, looking down at the 6 remaining men aimed at Kale's sanctuary. The hunt wasn't over until the clock ran out, and you were ready to drop the hammer. Chapter 36, The Hunter Being Hunted. 3:45 p.m., hour 10. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the cracked asphalt of District 4. Below the tenement window, the manipulator scout rested the heavy RPG tube onto his shoulder, aiming the laser sight directly at the lock of the boiler room's iron door. Say good night to your master, brat. The scout bellowed into the storm. He squeezed the trigger. THUNG. The warhead shot down the narrow alleyway, trailing a plume of white smoke and fire. In that fraction of a second, you didn't drop down to block it with Oakhaven Aegis. Your aura was too low. A point-blank detonation against the door would shatter the wall and crush Kale beneath the debris. Instead, you leapt straight out of the 3rd-story window into open air, dropping like a meteor into the warhead's path. You reached out with your bare, unarmored hands mid-air, catching the tail fins of the speeding rocket, and used your full body weight to wrench its trajectory upward. Boom! The rocket detonated harmlessly 40 feet in the air against the stone cornice of the upper tenement, showering the alley in flaming debris and brick dust. You slammed heavily onto the wet cobblestones below, rolling through the impact. You pushed yourself up to one knee, but your body finally betrayed you. Cough. A spray of red blood hit the wet pavement. Your physical frame was screaming. Muscle fibers torn, ribs cracked, aura reserves flickering at a dead 1%. Your vision blurred into dizzying streaks of gray and yellow. You were 12 years old. You had held off a military-grade purge squad for 10 straight hours. You had reached the absolute limit of human endurance. The climax, awaken. He's spent, he's done, the manipulator scout roared in triumph, dropping the empty launcher and drawing a heavy combat blade. The 5 surviving mercenaries closed in around you in a tight circle, their weapons raised, their eyes full of malicious glee. 10 hours of trouble from a little rat, the scout spat, stepping up to you and raising his blade over your neck. Look at you. You can't even lift your arm. You're out of aura, kid. It's over. You knelt in the mud, your head hanging low, wet hair covering your eyes. Your physical body was fainting. Your public hatsu was completely drained. Out of aura, you thought in the cold, silent depths of your consciousness. No, public aura is gone, but my foundation has 2 souls. Deep within the vault of your post-mortem spirit, the secondary engine, the unshackled, dormant post-mortem specialist aura, ignited like a dying star resetting its core. The air in the alleyway suddenly froze. The rain falling within a 10-meter radius didn't hit the ground, it stopped mid-air, suspended in space by an overwhelming, suffocating pressure. What is this? The scout stumbled backward, his blade shaking uncontrollably as his skin broke out in intense goosebumps. Where is this aura coming from? Slowly, effortlessly, you stood up. You didn't raise your hands. You didn't summon Oakhaven Aegis. Instead, a deep, pitch-black energy infused with shimmering silver-gray threads erupted from your body, swirling around you like an absolute, physical hurricane. Secret HATSU unlocked. Chronicle replication. Full activation. The Chronicle of the Departed. Level 3 resonance. Source. Dual postmortem specialist energy. Replicated ability. The Sovereign's Thread. Black Symphony. Efficiency. 100%. Your eyes opened. They were no longer the calm, grounded eyes of an apprentice. They burned with an unholy, ancient dual light. You said it's over, your voice echoed, not as a 12-year-old child, but as a layered, resonant double tone that vibrated through the very bricks of the alley. You flicked your right index finger. Zip 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 zip. 5 razor-thin, pitch-black strands of emitted aura thread shot out from your fingertips, slicing through the storm clouds and wrapping instantly around the throats, wrists, and ankles of all 5 remaining mercenaries. What is this? Kale's technique, the scout screamed, his eyes bulging as he was lifted 3 feet off the ground, completely paralyzed in midair by your black threads. How do you have his HATSU? You wanted the hunter, you whispered, slowly closing your fist. You got his vessel. The execution. You didn't execute them with cruelty. You executed them with absolute, mathematical precision. With a single, effortless twist of your wrist, you inverted the kinetic vectors of their own body mass. CRUNCH crack thud. The black thread slammed all 5 mercenaries into the stone walls with violent, terrifying speed, completely severing their aura nodes and knocking them into instant, deep unconsciousness. Their weapons clattered uselessly into the mud. The fight was over. The black aura threads dissolved into the cold rain. The suspended raindrops fell all at once, splashing against the pavement. The limit reached. 4 p.m., hour 10:40. The alley was dead silent. 9 high-tier enforcers lay defeated, scattered across the ruins of District 4. The boiler room door remained completely untouched, pristine, and secure. You stood alone in the dark rain. The pitch-black specialist aura receded back into the deepest vault of your post-mortem soul, locking itself away once more. Your knees finally gave out. Thud. You collapsed onto your side in the wet gravel, your breathing fading to a soft, faint whisper. Your vision turned pitch black as total physical exhaustion finally dragged your conscious mind under. The Master wakes. 5 p.m., hour 12 o'clock. The iron door of the boiler room creaked slowly open. Kale stepped out into the dim twilight air. His 12-hour forced zetsu had just lifted, his aura nodes reopening into a smooth, healthy 10. He took off his dark glasses, looking around the alleyway. His eyes widened in genuine, uncharacteristic shock. The alley was a war zone, cratered pavement, shattered tenement walls, destroyed transport trucks, and 9 unconscious, heavily armed enforcers tied up or crushed against the brickwork. And in the center of it all lay his 12-year-old apprentice, unconscious in the mud, holding an unbroken, victorious silence. Kale walked over, kneeling beside you. He checked your pulse, steady, deep, and resting, then looked at the subtle, lingering black thread aura traces on the surrounding walls. Kale let out a long, quiet exhale, a soft, rare smile appearing on his face as he gently picked your small, exhausted body up into his arms. 10 hours, Ren, Kale whispered into the quiet rain, pulling his coat over your shoulders. You kept the wall standing. Chapter 37, The Ghost of the Master's Mind. District 4 Safe House, 2 days later. The room smelled of dry cedar, alcohol rub, and herbal tea. When your eyes opened, you weren't in the mud of District 4, nor were you in the damp boiler room. You were lying on a clean cot inside Father Thomas's hidden sanctuary basement. Thick cotton bandages wrapped your forearms, ribs, and shoulders. Beside the cot, Kale sat in an old wooden armchair, reading a book under the dim yellow light of an oil lamp. His dark glasses were back on, his expression as unreadable as ever. You've been out for 48 hours, Kale said softly, not looking up from his page. Your body took a beating, but your nodes are stable. Father Thomas checked your inner organs, no permanent damage. You sat up slowly, the dry sheets rustling. Your physical body felt hollow, like a wooden shell drained of its sap. The purge squad? You asked, your voice raspy. Cleared out, Kale replied, closing his book with a quiet thump. The Mafia elders thought a full strike team would clean up the loose ends. When 9 of their best enforcers ended up broken and bound in an alley, beaten by a single kid, the elders panicked. They pulled their entire operation out of District 4 overnight. He looked at you through his dark lenses, his tone lingering with a quiet, solemn gravity. No one knows how it happened, Ren. The local gangs think a rogue high-rank hunter dropped from the sky to save us. I kept it that way. You gave a small nod, looking down at your bandaged hands. Good, your mind thought. The secret is safe. The hidden price. You had believed that your dual post-mortem engine made you immune to the physical ruin Kale suffered after using the Sovereign's thread, Black Symphony. Your physical nervous system hadn't paralyzed. You hadn't suffered 12 hours of forced, bleeding zetsu. Your dual soul had absorbed the kinetic recoil seamlessly. But Nen is an energy born of the mind, the spirit, and the soul. And when you replicated a Hatsu through the Chronicle of the Departed, you didn't just copy the physical mechanics, you copied the emotional imprint of its creator. Kale had never spoken about the psychological weight of his Hatsu. He had never told you why his threads felt so suffocatingly cold. Now, as you sat on the cot, the true backlash struck you in the quiet darkness of your mind. Replicated backlash, empathic bleed through. Ability used, the Sovereign's thread, Black Symphony. Source of backlash, direct residual emotional resonance from Kale's soul memory. Manifestation, severe emotional numbness, phantom grief, and detachment from your own identity. Duration, indefinite. A sudden, crushing wave of coldness washed through your chest. It wasn't physical pain, it was a suffocating, absolute feeling of isolation. Through the lingering echo of Cale's technique, you felt the exact mental state Cale had to maintain whenever he drove those surgical needles into his arms. A total, merciless suppression of all human warmth, a lingering grief for allies long dead, and the haunting realization that every time he controlled a vector, he felt like an unfeeling puppet master severing his own humanity. You stared at the palm of your hand, but for a terrifying 10 seconds, you couldn't remember who you were. Am I Ren? Am I the transmigrator? Or am I just a cold, hollow shell holding someone else's nightmare? Your breath hitched, a faint cold sweat breaking out across your forehead. You couldn't feel warmth. You couldn't feel relief that the mission was over. You felt entirely disconnected from your own body, a ghost adrift in someone else's memory. The unspoken understanding. Cale observed the subtle tremor in your fingers. He didn't ask what happened in that alley. He didn't ask how you held off 9 men or why the walls carried micro scratches identical to his thread vectors. He simply stood up, walked over to the cot, and set a warm mug of bitter herbal tea on the small wooden crate beside your bed. The technique isn't just aura, Ren, Cale said, his voice dropping into a low, gentle murmur that cut through the foggy isolation in your mind. When a hunter creates a hatsu out of tragedy, that hatsu carries the weight of everything they lost to make it. He placed a heavy, warm hand on your shoulder, grounding you, pulling your consciousness back into the present moment. Don't let someone else's shadows swallow who you are, Cale added softly. You built a wall to protect people. Hold on to that foundation. The warmth of his hand, combined with his quiet words, slowly dissolved the icy, emotional paralysis clinging to your soul. Your breathing leveled out. The cold, haunting emptiness receded back into the dark vault of your specialist library. You looked up at your instructor, offering a small, tired, but genuine nod. I understand, Instructor Cale. Good, Cale said, turning toward the door. Rest for 2 more days. Then we leave Meteor City. Our business in the junk heaps is finished. You leaned back against the headboard, taking a slow sip of the hot tea. The backlash was severe, but you had survived it. You had defended the master, mastered a new depth of your secret library, and proven that even when pushed to the absolute brink, your foundation would never break. Chapter 38, The Phantom in the Mirror. Late February 1986, the border of District 4. You and Cale walked along a rusting iron gantry overlooking the vast crater where millions of tons of industrial glass lay shattered like thousands of broken mirrors. Below, the distant, silent smoke of burning garbage drifted into the pale twilight sky. Your body was nearly healed. The physical bruises were fading, and the icy emotional backlash from replicating Cale's Black Symphony had settled into a quiet, manageable hum deep within your specialist library. Cale stopped at the edge of the gantry. He didn't pull out a cigarette this time. He rested both hands on the cold iron rail, gazing into the valley of broken glass. For as long as you had known him, Cale had been the ultimate baseline of a professional hunter, calm, impossibly precise, emotionally detached, and remarkably gentle when guiding a 12-year-old student through the dangerous world of Nen. He was a man without a visible past, a shadow who existed only to execute association missions with absolute, sterile efficiency. However, standing at the edge of the forgotten city, Cale slowly reached up and took off his dark glasses. The unmasked face. Without his glasses, Cale looked shockingly human. His eyes were not cold steel, they were tired, bloodshot, and etched with deep, hollow rings of long unresolved grief. The faint scars running near his left temple twitched slightly in the damp air. You felt it, didn't you, Ren? Kale asked softly, his voice carrying a raspy, uncharacteristic rawness. 2 nights ago, after the fight. The coldness, the emptiness that makes you feel like you aren't a person anymore. You remained quiet, standing a half step behind him, keeping your posture respectful and grounded. I wasn't always a double-star hunter working high-risk operations for the association, Kale began, his gaze fixed on the endless junk heap. 15 years ago, I was just a naive boy from a prosperous commercial city in the East. I thought the hunter license was a badge of absolute freedom. He let out a short, dry laugh, a hollow sound devoid of any humor. I formed an exploration team with 3 friends from my rookie year. We were young, arrogant, and believed our Nen fundamentals made us untouchable. We took a contract to explore an unregistered ruin near the Mobius coast, and we stumbled right into a high-tier subterranean beast nest. The origin of the thread. Kale's knuckles turned white as his grip tightened on the rusted iron railing. We were completely outmatched, Kale murmured, his voice dropping into a painful whisper. My combat skills were useless. My friends were slaughtered right in front of me, one by one. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, Ren. He turned his head slightly, his bloodshot eyes locking onto yours. I survived because I was a coward. I used my basic manipulation to manipulate the falling debris behind me, blocking the tunnel exit, sacrificing my pinned teammate's lower body so I could crawl out of the dark alone. Kale's core origin and motivation. The trauma sacrificed his team to survive a ruin collapse. The motive, pure, unadulterated guilt and penance. The HATSU birth, Black Symphony, was created not to defeat enemies, but to control every vector so he would never be forced to make a panicked, cowardly choice again. The vow, price, the extreme physical pain and paralysis are his self-imposed. Punishment, a physical tax he forces his body to pay for. Surviving when his team died. Your transmigrator mind connected every single piece of the puzzle. The brutal backlash of Black Symphony, the nerve paralysis, the bleeding, the agonizing 12-hour forced zetsu, wasn't just a random mechanical limitation. It was a subconscious vow of self-punishment. Kale's guilt was so absolute that his Nen demanded he suffer like his dying teammates every single time he drew upon that power to save a life. He didn't become a hunter for money, fame, or secret knowledge. He became an operative to stand as an unbreakable wall for others, to pay a debt he believed he could never settle. The inheritance. I became a calculated, gentle instructor because I promised myself I would never let another kid under my watch become an arrogant casualty of this world, Kale said softly, slipping his dark glasses back over his tired eyes, putting the professional mask back on. He turned around to face you completely. When I found you in the Visca forest, Ren, I saw a 12-year-old child who carried a quiet, strange weight in his eyes. You had the eyes of someone who had already died once. I promised myself I would build you a foundation so solid that no monster in this world could shatter you. You stood straight in the cold wind, looking at the man who had trained you, protected you, and carried a nightmare for 15 years. The emotional backlash you had felt from copying his Hatsu suddenly made profound, tragic sense. It wasn't just coldness. It was the lingering residue of a man who believed he was already a ghost. You reached down, lightly touching the iron braces hidden beneath your sleeves, the public Oakhaven aegis you had used to protect Kale's defenseless body for 10 straight hours in that rain-soaked alley. You didn't fail in District 4, Instructor Kale, you said, your voice steady, warm, and rock solid. And your foundation didn't break. We both walked out alive. Cale stared at you for 3 long seconds. The rigid, heavy tension in his shoulders slowly melted away, replaced by a subtle, genuine warmth in his breath. Yeah, Cale murmured, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. We did. He tapped his dark glasses with a finger and gestured toward the western road leading out of Meteor City. Chapter 39, The Unfinished Business. July 1986, 5 months in Meteor City. The Continental Mainland train ticket sat in the inner pocket of your poncho, its crisp paper turning soft and worn from months of humidity and soot. 5 months had passed since the raid on Gaston's subterranean facility. 5 months of breathing the metallic, sour dust of District 4. What was supposed to be a swift in-and-out undercover operation had ground down into a slow, tense standoff against the shadows. In a ruined clock tower overlooking St. Jude's Sanctuary, Cale stood near a shattered lancet window. His canvas coat was patched at the elbow, and his dark glasses reflected the dull, iron-gray sky. I'm sorry, Ren, Cale said quietly, his tone heavy with a rare, sincere apology. It looks like we aren't boarding that train to the mainland anytime soon. You leaned against a stone pillar, keeping your nodes suppressed in a low, effortless 10. The syndicate's lingering line. They aren't just lingering, they're obsessing, Cale replied, adjusting his collar. The mafia elders in Yorknew lost millions when Gaston's network collapsed. For 5 months, their high-tier trackers have been combing Meteor City like starving hounds. They know a double-star hunter is behind it, and they know the trail leads somewhere near District 4. Cale turned to look down at the stone courtyard of Father Thomas's church, where 32 rescued children were playing silently in the dirt. If I stay here, they will eventually pinpoint this sanctuary, Cale continued, his jaw tightening. They'll burn St. Jude's to the ground and slaughter every child inside just to draw me into the open. So you're pulling him away, you said smoothly, instantly catching his strategic intent. I'm acting as the decoy, Cale confirmed. Tonight, I leak my aura signature near the eastern border junk heaps. I lead their main purge squad out into the deep badlands, miles away from civil settlements. I'll take them down one by one, in isolation, where I can maneuver freely. He looked at you, his gray eyes dead serious behind his lenses. I need you to stay here, Ren. Keep your identity completely hidden under Zetsu. If any stray scouts or secondary hit teams slip past my trail and target St. Jude's, you are the last line of defense. Protect Father Thomas and the children. You reached beneath your long sleeves, feeling the heavy, cold iron of your conjured braces. My Oakhaven Aegis was built for containment and siege protection. If they come here, they won't cross the threshold. The Master's warning. Cale nodded once, satisfied with your answer. He turned toward the wooden staircase to head down, but stopped at the top step. He hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty for a man who calculated every breath. He glanced back over his shoulder at you, rubbing his temple with a dry sigh. Before I leave, there's something you need to know about your host. You raised an eyebrow slightly. Father Thomas. Thomas loves those orphans, don't get me wrong. He feeds them and keeps them safe, Cale began, choosing his words carefully. But calling him a holy man is stretching it. How can I put this? Cale let out a dry, quiet chuckle, shaking his head. He's a corrupted priest, Ren, in the absolute trashiest way possible. Dossier Addendum. Father Thomas. Formal status, retired hunter, priest at St. Jude's Sanctuary. Personality, money-obsessed, foul-mouthed, heavy drinker, shameless pervert. Grey virtue, genuine affection for orphans, uses his ill-gotten money. Booze smuggling, and black market deals strictly to fund the sanctuary. The man is obsessed with money, Cale warned, his voice dropping into a low murmur. He drinks cheap grain alcohol straight out of the altar wine chalice. Swears like a drunken sailor when the kids aren't around, and he's got a shameless, perverted eye for any adult woman who wanders into District 4. He finances this sanctuary by hoarding black market coin and gambling with local gang leaders. Cale smirked slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. Don't let the priest robes fool you. He'll bless you with one hand, count his money with the other, and cuss out the rain in the same breath. Just keep your public hatsu ready, keep your specialist secrets buried deep, and don't get roped into any of his shady side hustles while I'm gone. Understood, instructor, you replied, your voice flat and steady. I'll be back in 3 days, Cale said, stepping into the darkness of the stairwell. Try not to let Thomas teach you any new cussed-out vocabulary. The Alone Guard. An hour later, Cale vanished into the twilight fog of Meteor City, his aura intentionally flared into a subtle, noticeable pulse that drew the distant eyes of the mafia trackers away from District 4. You stood alone on the roof of St. Jude's Sanctuary, watching the dark clouds roll over the trash mountains. Below in the courtyard, Father Thomas was sitting on a wooden crate, taking a heavy swig from a brown glass bottle. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, spat into the dirt, and muttered a string of colorful curses under his breath as he tried to count a crumpled wad of bills, before putting on a warm, toothy smile to wave at one of the playing orphans. A booze-chugging, foul-mouthed, perverted priest who hoards cash just to keep an orphanage running, your transmigrator mind pondered, keeping your nodes locked in a silent, absolute zetsu. Cale was gone. The syndicate was hunting. A degenerate priest held the keys to your shelter. And you were a 12-year-old monster in disguise, holding an unbreakable shield in the heart of the world's garbage dump. Chapter 40. The Corrupt Priest. District 4, midnight. The courtyard was dead silent now. The bonfire had reduced to a pile of glowing orange coals, crackling softly whenever the cold night breeze swept through the stone arches. Cale was gone. He had melted into the fog an hour ago, leaving no trace behind except for the fading embers and the faint smell of roasted meat. You sat on the stone steps leading into the church nave, your dark poncho pulled tight against the damp chill. Your nodes remained tightly sealed in an effortless, ghost-like zetsu. Inside the sanctuary, the gentle sounds of 32 orphans sleeping on floor pallets echoed softly. But out in the dark hallway, a heavy, unsteadily stomping pair of boots approached the courtyard door. Clack, clack, thud. Father Thomas stumbled out into the cool night air, clutching an almost empty bottle of grain alcohol by its neck. His cassock was completely unbuttoned, revealing a stained undershirt and a heavy, silver crucifix hanging upside down around his neck from pure carelessness. Ah, kid, Thomas slurped, leaning heavily against the stone doorway. He took a long swig, let out a loud, unholy belch, and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. The stoic baby hunter is still awake, huh? What, you think a bogeyman's gonna jump over the fence at midnight? I'm keeping watch, Father, you said smoothly, not shifting your position by a single millimeter. Father, nothing, Thomas spat, taking 3 heavy steps toward you and plopping down onto the stone bench with a groan that sounded like a dying engine. Call me Thomas, or the guy who pays for your damn bread. Cale told you all about me, didn't he? I saw the way he was whispering in the clock tower. He took another swig, his bleary, red-rimmed eyes narrowing as he glared at you through the dark. Let me guess. He called me a greedy, swearing, degenerate old bastard who buys stolen goods from the mafia. He mentioned you have pragmatic priorities, you replied neutrally. Thomas burst into a harsh, wheezing laugh that ended in a fit of coughing. Pragmatic? Ha, that's Cale's fancy way of saying I'm going straight to hell. Thomas scratched his stubbled chin, shaking his head. Look around you, kid. This isn't York New City. This isn't some cozy parish where rich old ladies throw $1,000 checks into the collection plate. This is Meteor City. He slammed the glass bottle down onto the stone bench next to him with a sharp clink. The account books. St. Jude's monthly expenses. Head count, 32 rescued children plus 8 sick district refinement workers. Daily calories, approximately 60,000 kilocalories needed just to prevent starvation. Medical supplies, antibiotic salve, clean water filters, cholera vaccines. Monthly cost, approximately 1,800,000 jenny. Church income, 0 jenny. You know how much it costs to keep 32 kids from dying of cholera in a landfill. Thomas muttered, his foul language dropping for a brief second into something cold and dead. 1.8 million jenny a month. Where the hell do you think that money comes from? Heaven. He pulled a greasy, crumpled notebook from his cassock pocket and slapped it onto your lap. You glanced down. Through the dim moonlight, you saw handwritten ledgers, every single penny recorded in meticulous, obsessive detail. -12:04, sold 3 crates stolen copper wire to mafia broker to bought 400 kilograms rice. -18:04, won 150k jenny in back alley dice game to purchase 12 sets of winter coats. 02:05, bribed District 4 elder to secured clean water pipe access for 3 months. There wasn't a single transaction for alcohol, gambling debts, or personal luxury. Every single cent Thomas squeezed out of local gangs, black market contraband, and greasy card games went straight into rice bags, penicillin, and clean water pipes. I swear, I drink, I gamble, and I flirt with the butcher's widow down in District 3, Thomas grunted, leaning his head back against the cold stone wall, staring up at the polluted, starless sky. Because if I try to be a saint in a garbage dump, these kids die in 3 days. He closed his eyes, his breathing growing heavy and slow as the alcohol finally caught up to him. Cale wants to be a hero who carries the whole world's guilt on his shoulders, Thomas mumbled, his voice fading into a sleepy, raspy slurring. Me, I'd rather steal from the devil himself if it means my kids get breakfast tomorrow. Call it corrupt all you want. Within 2 minutes, the priest was fast asleep on the stone bench, snoring loudly with the empty bottle still clutched in his hand. You sat quietly in the dark, looking at the crumpled ledger in your lap, then at the sleeping, foul-mouthed priest who ran an underground sanctuary on stolen mafia money. A master who punishes himself with guilt, and a priest who sells his soul to buy rice, your transmigrator mind noted silently. You picked up the ledger, folded it neatly, and slipped it back into Thomas's cassock pocket. Then you pulled a spare woolen blanket from the church bench and draped it over his shoulders. You stepped back onto the high archway of the church roof, looking out toward the dark, silent Badlands where Cale was currently hunting the syndicate. Your public hatsu was ready. Your specialist library was quiet. The corrupt priest was asleep, and the wall of District 4 was on duty. Chapter 41, The Mask and the Outfield. July 1986, 7 a.m. The morning air in District 4 was thick with the smell of wet soot and burning copper. Standing near the courtyard washbasin, you watched Father Thomas step out onto the stone porch. The foul-mouthed, booze-chugging degenerate who had passed out snoring on a bench 5 hours ago was completely gone. In his place stood a saint. His cassock was neatly buttoned to the throat, his grey hair was combed back, and his weathered face carried a warm, gentle smile that looked like it belonged on a stained glass window. "Good morning, my little lambs," Thomas said, his voice soft, melodic, and impossibly cultured. "Remember to give thanks for the clean water today, and help Sister Elena with the breakfast bowls." The children swarmed around his legs like ducklings, giggling and holding onto his robes. "And for a while, children," Thomas added, gently placing a hand on your shoulder and pulling you forward with a serene smile, "our young guest Ren will be blending in with you. Treat him like a brother, share your tools, and show him around the grounds." "What a masterclass of a mask," your transmigrator mind noted silently, keeping your face completely neutral as you looked up at him. "If I hadn't read his black market accounting ledger last night, I'd actually believe he was a saint." Thomas leaned down slightly, as if giving you a fatherly blessing, and whispered under his breath at a volume only your refined ears could catch. "Don't just stand there looking stoic, kid. Go out with the scrap detail and keep an eye on them. And if you find any uncorroded brass fittings in the pile, hide them in your boots before the scavengers see them." He straightened up, patted your head with a saintly, "God bless you, my boy," and walked off to the chapel with an aura of pure, holy tranquility. Timeline calculation. As you walked toward the church gates alongside a small group of orphans holding iron buckets and magnetic picks, your mind began sifting through your inner transmigrator database. Timeline integration, METEOR City. Current year, MID 1986. Original lore, the Phantom Troop was officially founded in Meteor City around 1986 to 1987 by Crollo Lucifer. Local status, District 4 is currently experiencing high friction between mafia-backed child trafficking networks and local elders. Strategic note, keep Zetsu locked. Avoid drawing the attention of local high-potential NEN users or early troop founding members. 1986, you thought, stepping over a mound of crushed concrete outside the sanctuary walls. Crollo and the founding members are likely active in the city right now, building their network or retaliating against mafia kidnappers. The world was quietly shifting beneath the surface, and keeping Kale's decoy operations separate from the troops' emerging sphere was critical. The outfield scrap run. "Hey, Ren, right?" A tall boy around 13 with a smudge of black oil across his nose called out, tossing a spare wooden-handled magnet pick toward you. You caught it effortlessly. "I'm Leo," the boy said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Father Thomas said you're helping us on the outfield today. Stay close to the group. Don't wander past the rusted boiler stacks, that's District 5 territory, and the scavengers over there aren't friendly." The outfield was a vast, 3-mile stretch of mountainous junk heaps bordering the eastern edge of District 4. It was where the heavy industrial waste from the mainland was dumped via automated rail cars. For the orphans of St. Jude's, it was their primary lifeline. Finding usable copper, intact vacuum tubes, or rare metals meant Father Thomas could trade them at the local market for grain and medical salves. Objective, outfield scrap detail. Goal, gather 50 kilograms of salvageable copper wire and brass fittings. Cover, act like a normal, frail orphan worker. Hidden duty, maintain a 300-meter geoperimeter to protect the kids from stray syndicate scouts or hostile scavengers. Let's check the Sector 7 heap. A younger girl named Mia cheered, hauling a heavy iron bucket. The morning drop had electrical scrap. You fell into line beside them, keeping your posture slightly slumped and your steps heavy to mimic a normal 12-year-old child. Under your long poncho sleeves, your conjured iron and oak braces lay dormant, and your nodes were locked tight in absolute zetsu. As the orphans scattered across the towering mountain of rusted metal, picking through wires and circuit boards, you knelt by a pile of shattered iron casing. Your micro-level gyo sharpened behind your pupils, silently scanning the surrounding toxic mist for any high-density aura signatures. Kale was out in the Badlands, drawing the main purge squad away. Thomas was playing the Saint back at the church. And out here on the trash heaps, the silent guard was picking up scrap wire, waiting to see what the shadow of 1986 would throw at him next. Chapter 42, The Battery Paradox. August 1986, 3 weeks later. 1 week turned into 2. 2 weeks dragged into 3. Out in the Badlands, Kale was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse, leading the main syndicate purge squad through the toxic wastes of Meteor City. But inside District 4, my life had settled into a bizarre, grueling test of endurance that had absolutely nothing to do with Nen combat. At night, I stood watch. I maintained a quiet, ghost-like zetsu on the roof of St. Jude's, scanning a 300-meter perimeter for enemy scouts. That part was easy. That was just spatial tracking and tactical discipline. It was the daytime that was destroying me. Operational Fatigue Report. DAYTIME cover. Night duty, 5 hours of perimeter guarding. Day duty, 12 hours of being a normal 12-year-old. Conclusion. Children possess a terrifying, mathematically impossible source of unlimited kinetic energy. I had faced high-tier Nen users, survived Ging's torturous conditioning, and held a 4-meter alley bottleneck against rocket launchers for 10 straight hours. None of it compared to playing tag on a mountain of rusted iron scrap with 32 orphans at 8 in the morning. Children have a limitless battery. It's a universal law of nature. Their energy spikes at the exact millisecond an adult soul reaches complete exhaustion. They ran, they screamed, they demanded I turn scrap metal into makeshift toys, and they challenged me to climbing races up the church wall. Because I had to keep my cover as a frail, normal kid, I couldn't use Nen to enhance my stamina. I had to physically drag my 12-year-old body through 6 hours of endless play, all while my secret, exhausted adult soul screamed internally for a quiet dark room and a cup of black coffee. So this is what Thomas deals with every single day, my transmigrator mind realized with newfound, horrified respect. That stubborn, foul-mouthed old bastard isn't just running a black market racket. He's surviving a daily war against 32 infinite energy generators. The roof shift. 1:15 a.m. The night air was freezing, carrying the sharp scent of ozone from a distant thunderstorm. I sat cross-legged on the high stone roof of the church nave, resting my aching back against a weathered gargoyle. My legs felt like lead, and my eyelids were so heavy they felt glued shut. Clack, clack, thud. A pair of heavy boots stomped up the rusted iron fire escape behind me. Father Thomas poked his head over the roof ledge. His cassock was unbuttoned to his chest, a half-empty bottle of cheap amber liquor sticking out of his pocket, and a crumpled pack of black market cigarettes tucked behind his ear. He climbed over the railing with a grunt, plopped himself down on the stone beside me, and let out a long, wheezing sigh. He pulled the cigarette from behind his ear, clicked a rusted brass lighter, and took a deep, dragging puff. The orange ember lit up his stubbled, alcohol-flushed face in the dark. He looked over at me, eyeing my slumped posture and the dark circles under my eyes. He pulled the crumpled cigarette pack from his pocket and tapped it against his palm. "Yo, little brat," Thomas rasped, his voice rough from cheap tobacco. "You want a cigarette? Or maybe a swig of alcohol? We only have the cheap stuff here, but it takes the edge off." I turned my head very slowly, staring at him with absolute, unblinking deadpan. "What the fuck, Thomas?" I blurted out, dropping my polite apprentice act entirely for the first time. "I am 12 years old." Thomas paused, the cigarette hanging from his lip. He blinked twice, then burst into a sudden, loud, hacking laugh that echoed off the stone courtyard below. "Gahahahaha, oh, look at that." The polite little robot finally cussed. Thomas slapped his knee, taking a heavy swig straight from the bottle. "Don't give me that look, kid. In Meteor City, 12 is practically middle-aged. By 14, most of these brats are either running gang errands or married to a scrap trader." He blew a cloud of gray smoke into the night air, leaning his head back against the gargoyle. "Besides," Thomas grunted, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at me through the smoke, "you don't fight like a kid, you don't watch the perimeter like a kid, and you definitely don't look at the world like a kid. You've got the eyes of an old man who's already buried 3 wives and a mortgage." Perception check. FATHER Thomas. Intuition. High. Observation. He doesn't know about your specialist transmigrator soul. But his street instincts tell him you are not a normal child. Status. Ali. I let out a long, exhausted breath, resting my elbows on my knees. "The children," I muttered softly, staring down at the quiet courtyard. "They don't stop moving." Thomas took another slow drag of his cigarette, a rare, genuine smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Told ya," the old priest grumbled, setting the liquor bottle down between us. "Tag is harder than a mafia raid. Now you know why I drink." I didn't take the cigarette, and I didn't touch the liquor. But as the cold wind swept across the roof of District 4, I sat beside the corrupt, swearing old priest in silence, 2 adult souls sharing a quiet break in the middle of a war against time, tired beyond belief, and keeping watch over 32 sleeping children. Chapter 43, Sister Elena's Grace. August 1986, Week 4. If Father Thomas was the roaring engine that dragged St. Jude's sanctuary through the mud, Sister Elena was the quiet glue that stopped the whole place from flying apart. She was a local woman in her late 20s, born and raised in District 4. She didn't wear a formal nun's habit, just a simple, faded blue headscarf and a gray linen dress patched at the hem. Unlike Thomas, who smelled of cheap grain alcohol and stale tobacco, Sister Elena smelled faintly of lavender and boiled soap. She was the only person in the sanctuary who could make the stubborn, foul-mouthed priest instantly zip his mouth shut with a single sharp glare. The kitchen war. 6:30 a.m. The church kitchen was a cavernous, stone-walled room where steam rose from 3 massive iron cauldrons. You sat on a low wooden bench, methodically peeling a mountain of tough, fibrous root vegetables scavenged from the local market. Your small hands moved with precise, mechanical rhythm, an unintended side effect of your strict Nen physical training. Step, peel, drop. Step, peel, drop. "You work too fast, little wren," a gentle, melodic voice called out over the bubbling steam. Sister Elena walked over, carrying a wooden tray loaded with empty tin bowls. She set the tray down and wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, looking down at you with warm, observant brown eyes. "You peel those roots like you're performing surgery," she said with a soft chuckle, kneeling beside you on the stone floor. "No child peels a radish like it's a military objective." You paused, your knife hovering over a root. You kept your face flat, instantly adjusting your posture to look a little more relaxed. I just want to finish quickly so I can help outside, sister. Father Thomas says you're Cale's apprentice, Elena said quietly, reaching into her apron pocket and pulling out a small, dried plum. She pressed it into your palm. He tells the children you're a traveler, but I see the way you look at the doorway every time a floorboard creaks. Dossier Addendum. Sister Elena. Status: Sanctuary caretaker, former district nurse. Nen status: non-user. Role: emotional anchor for the 32 orphans, counterweight to Thomas. Danger level: 0. You looked at the small, wrinkled plum in your hand. Food like this was a luxury in Meteor City, usually reserved for the sick infants in the back room. I don't need this, sister, you said, trying to hand it back. Give it to Mia or Leo. Mia and Leo already had theirs, Elena smiled, gently pushing your hand back. You spend all day running with the children to make them feel safe, and you spend all night sitting alone on that freezing roof while Thomas drinks himself to sleep. She reached out and lightly brushed a strand of wet hair from your forehead. Her hand was warm, calloused, and entirely free of malice. Even a brave little guard needs to eat a plum sometimes, she whispered softly. The moral anchor. From the doorway of the kitchen, a loud, raspy clearing of the throat interrupted the quiet moment. Elena, Father Thomas grunted, leaning against the doorframe with a mug of black tea. Where's the morning blessing salt? He was about to add a colorful string of curses, but the moment his eyes caught Elena's sharp, warning stare, the corrupt old priest instantly choked on his own words, clearing his throat awkwardly. I mean, the salt for the soup, sister, if you please. It's on the top shelf where you left it after your card game last night, Thomas, Elena replied smoothly, not even turning around. And if I smell liquor on your breath before the noon prayer, you're washing the bedsheets yourself this week. Thomas muttered something under his breath about tyrannical nuns, and scuttled away toward the chapel like a scolded hound. You stared after the priest, then back at Elena, genuinely surprised. He actually listens to you? You asked. Sister Elena laughed, a bright, clear sound that seemed to chase away the gloomy soot hanging in the kitchen air. Thomas acts like a tough, shameless crook because he thinks that's what this city requires, she said, stirring the big cauldron with a long wooden paddle. And maybe he's right. Meteor City is cruel to holy men. But deep down, he's terrified that one day he'll wake up and realize he's become no different than the mafia bosses he trades with. She looked back at you, her eyes filled with a quiet, profound understanding. My job isn't to run the sanctuary, Ren. My job is to remind Thomas, and you, that you don't have to turn your heart into stone just to survive in the dark. The shift. You sat alone in the kitchen for a few minutes after Elena went to fetch more firewood. You looked down at the dried plum in your small, bandaged palm. In your past life, you were an adult who understood the harsh realities of the world. In this life, you were a transmigrator training to be a lethal, unbreakable Nen combatant. You viewed people through tactical profiles, threat assessments, and aura capacities. Cale taught you how to survive. Thomas showed you how to hustle. But Sister Elena was the gentle reminder of why you were standing guard in the first place. You put the plum in your mouth. It was sweet, slightly sour, and tasted like real life. You wiped your knife, picked up the next root, and kept peeling, not as a military objective, but just a kid helping make breakfast for 32 children. Chapter 44, The Silent Cry of the Dump. September 1986, 1 month later. A whole month had passed. The morning arrived with a thin bird delivering a tightly rolled parchment to the clock tower window, a secure messenger bird Kale often used for low trace communications. I unrolled the small paper under a tight spotlight of Gyo. The handwriting was unmistakable, small, razor-sharp, and precise. Encrypted letter, Instructor Kael. Location, Outer Badlands, Border Zone 9. Status, Pursuit diverted successfully. 4 high-tier trackers eliminated. Timeline, the syndicate network runs deep into York News Elder Council. It will take 3 to 6 months to completely erase all active traces and sever their tracking line back to District 4. Instruction, maintain posture. Hold St. Jude's. Do not leave your post. 3 to 6 months. In my inner soul, my transmigrator mind screamed into the dark void. Wait, let me come out there and deal with the mafia with you. Give me the syndicate targets. Anything is better than playing babysitter to 32 hyperactive kids for half a year. I wanted to fight. I wanted to refine my specialist library. I wanted to break in forces. But the scream remained locked deep inside my chest. Outwardly, my face remained cold, calm, and expressionless. I slowly burned the letter over a candle, watching the black ash scatter into the morning wind. Come back safely, Kale, I thought quietly. I'll hold the line. The crying in the dark. 2:30 a.m. Night in Meteor City was never truly quiet. The distant hum of burning trash piles and the howl of wind through iron pipes acted as a constant background hum. I stood on the second-floor gallery of the church, looking down into the main hall where 32 children slept on thin cotton pallets. Then, I heard it. A tiny, muffled sob. In the far corner, a small 5-year-old girl named Lita was curled into a tight ball under her patched blanket. Her tiny shoulders trembled violently as she tried to swallow her whimpers, wiping her nose with the edge of her sleeve. Are they missing home? My inner soul wondered, watching her from the dark shadow of the balcony. Their parents, are they lonely? In Meteor City, home was a luxury most of these kids had never known. Most were dumped here in plastic bags or wooden crates as infants, rejected by a world that didn't want them. Before I could move down from the gallery, a soft shadow stepped out from the side hallway. Sister Elena. She didn't make a sound. She knelt quietly beside Lita's pallet, pulling the trembling child into her arms. She didn't offer empty promises or tell her everything would be fine. She simply held the girl close to her chest, gently rocking her back and forth while humming a low, sweet melody native to District 4. Slowly, the little girl's trembling stopped. Her small hands gripped Elena's shawl tightly, her breathing turning soft and rhythmic as she drifted back to sleep. Elena stayed there for 10 full minutes, stroking Lita's hair in the dark until the child was completely resting, before slipping away like a gentle breeze. The Ledger of Broken Souls. Sad sight, ain't it? A low, raspy whisper sounded right beside my ear. I didn't flinch. I had sensed his heavy, alcohol-tinged presence 5 seconds before he stepped onto the gallery. Father Thomas leaned his elbows against the wooden railing, staring down at the sleeping children below. He didn't have his priest mask on tonight. His cassock was open, he wasn't holding a bottle, and his face looked 30 years older under the dim moonlight. Lita was found 3 months ago near the District 3 sorting grid, Thomas murmured, his voice flat, devoid of its usual swearing and boisterous sarcasm. She was tucked inside a sealed iron toolbox. Her parents were refinement workers who died of chemical lung burn. The landlord dumped the box in the trash car to avoid paying burial fees. He gestured vaguely toward the sea of sleeping pallets below. See that boy in the corner? Leo. His older brother sold him to Gaston's organ brokers for 50,000 Jenny to buy a fix of junk dust. I broke the broker's jaw and dragged Leo out of a cage 3 days before you and Cale arrived. Dossier. The Children of St. Jude's. Lita. Orphaned by chemical refinement hazard. Abandoned in garbage grid. Leo. Rescued from Gaston's organ trafficking cage. MIA. Sole survivor of a District 5 gang territory purge. Common thread: sadness, rage, helplessness, and absolute abandonment. Thomas pulled his pack of cheap cigarettes from his pocket, looked at the sleeping children, and put it back without lighting it. People on the mainland think Meteor City is just a city of garbage, Thomas grunted softly, resting his chin on his knuckles. They think we're all trash, criminals, and monsters. They don't see these little souls. Angry, helpless, broken, and crying in the dark because the world declared they don't exist. He turned his head to look at me, his red-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. That's why I steal, Ren. That's why I deal with the mafia, that's why I gamble, and that's why I'll burn in hell when my time comes. Because if a corrupt, swearing old bastard like me doesn't hold the roof over their heads, no one else will. I stood beside the old priest in the dark, looking down at the 32 children sleeping peacefully under our guard. My transmigrator soul had wanted to fight mafia enforcers. I had wanted action, training, and power. But as I looked at Lita's quiet face and listened to the old priest's heavy breathing beside me, the icy detachment of my specialist mindset cracked just a little bit more. 3 to 6 months, I whispered into the quiet night. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Ha! Cale will be gone for 3 to 6 months, I said, leaning my hands against the balcony railing, my eyes burning with quiet, absolute resolve. Which means you have 6 more months of me holding this roof, Thomas. The old priest blinked, then let out a short, quiet snort, a faint smirk appearing on his tired face. Good, Thomas grumbled, turning around to walk down the hall. Because the soup tastes like shit when you don't help peel the radishes. Chapter 44, The Silent Cry of the Dump. For the next 2 hours, Thomas didn't move from the wooden balcony. One by one, he pointed down at the sleeping shapes, his raspy voice turning every single blanket into a page from a tragic book. He told me about all 32 of them. He spoke of MIA, whose family was erased in a gang turf war in District 5. Of little Sora, left behind in an empty brick barracks when an unannounced labor audit deported her mother's entire unregistered factory shift overnight. Of the twins, Marco and John, who survived 3 days inside a collapsed sewer pipe before Thomas pulled them out with his bare hands. 32 stories of rage, helplessness, abandonment, and quiet suffering. When the last story ended, the silence returned, heavier than before. Thomas pulled a battered tin flask from his cassock pocket, unscrewed the cap, but didn't drink. He just stared into the clear liquid as if searching for a face he hadn't seen in decades. Tell me something, kid, Thomas asked softly, his voice dropping into a register I had never heard from him before. Do you believe in God? Do I believe in God? The question hung cold in the air. As a transmigrated soul, someone who had literally died in one world, crossed the cosmic void, and awakened in the body of a 12-year-old child in the world of Hunter x Hunter, I knew better than anyone that the universe had mechanisms beyond human understanding, There was an afterlife. There was a soul. There was something. I began, turning to look at him. I believe there's something out there, but I don't know what to call it. Before I could say anything more, Thomas let out a soft, hollow exhale, cutting me off as he continued his own train of thought. The priest's burden. I used to believe, Thomas murmured, staring up at the cracked stained glass window near the ceiling. Back when I took my vows 30 years ago on the mainland, I thought the church was a light in the dark. Then I became a hunter. I saw the mainland, I saw the politics, I saw the greed. And then I came here, to Meteor City. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. When you see a 4-year-old child starve to death in a pile of rusted iron, while a mafia boss spends 10 million jenny on a bottle of wine 3 miles away, you stop believing in a merciful God. You realize that if good things are going to happen in a place like this, you have to drag 'em down with your own bloody fingers. He turned to face me completely. The dim moonlight caught his eyes, and for the first time since I had met him, the mask was entirely gone. There was no foul-mouthed crook, no fake saint, no cynical ex-hunter. I saw a man who was terrified. I saw worry, confusion, hopeless despair, and a tiny, flickering spark of desperate hope burning in his red-rimmed eyes. "Ren," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "If God really does exist, am I going straight to hell for all the things I've done? The stealing, the gambling, the black market deals with monsters. The absolution." I looked at the old priest standing before me. I could have given him a safe, tactical answer. I could have played the polite child. But looking into his eyes, he didn't want a child's comfort, he wanted the truth from someone who understood the weight of the dark. "Yeah," I said flatly, keeping my eyes fixed on his. "You probably deserve to go straight to hell for your corrupted priest behavior." Thomas flinched slightly, but I didn't stop. "You swear like a sailor, you drink altar wine, you trade with scumbags, and you're a shameless old bastard," I continued softly, my tone shifting into a warm, steady frequency. "But maybe God will forgive you, because beneath all that trash, you have a gentle, kind soul that keeps 32 dying kids alive when the rest of the world discarded them like garbage. I don't know. Heaven's accounting isn't my department." For 3 long seconds, Thomas stared at me in total silence. Then, his chest heaved. "Bah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha." Thomas burst into a roaring, hysterical laugh that echoed off the stone vaulting of the chapel. He laughed so hard he doubled over, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Thwack! Ow! Out of nowhere, his heavy, calloused hand came down and slapped the top of my head so hard my teeth rattled. "What the fuck, Thomas?" I yelled, rubbing my sore head and glaring at him with pure disbelief. "You crazy corrupted priest bastard. That actually hurt." "Gahaha, you little brat," Thomas wheezed, wiping his eyes with his sleeve and grinning from ear to ear. "You really don't hold back, do you?" His laughter slowly subsided into a warm, quiet sigh. He reached out and rested his heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, giving it a firm, affectionate squeeze. "Ren," Thomas said, his voice dropping into a quiet, deeply sincere tone. "I know you're technically 12 years old, but every time I talk to you, it feels like I'm talking to a fully mature, battle-hardened adult man." He looked into my eyes, his grin fading into something pure and genuine. "Thank you, kid, really." The silent vow. I looked at the old man, feeling the lingering sting on the top of my head, and let out a short, quiet snort of my own. "No, thank you, you old bastard," I muttered, a small, genuine smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. Thanks for saving these kids. As Thomas turned to walk back toward his room, his shoulders visibly lighter, his stride a little steadier, I turned back to the balcony railing, looking down at the 32 sleeping orphans in the dark hall below. Yeah, my transmigrator soul thought quietly into the night. Maybe this is what Ren wants, too. Not just to become strong, not just to survive, but to protect the helpless ones who have nowhere else to run. I reached under my poncho, lightly touching the iron braces of my Oakhaven Aegis. I'm the one who should be thanking you, Thomas, I thought silently, locking my nodes back into an absolute, unwavering Zetsu. Because you gave my shield a real reason to stand. Sister Elena was standing at the bottom of the balcony stairs. She wasn't wearing her gentle, saintly smile. Her hair was wrapped in a night scarf, her apron was tied over her nightdress, and in her hands, she held a heavy wooden sweeping broom like a two-handed combat spear. Before Thomas could even process her presence. Swoosh thwack. The wooden bristles of the broom slammed squarely into the back of the old priest's head with a sound like a cracking timber. Ouch, what the? Thomas yelped, stumbling forward and clutching his head. Thomas, Sister Elena whispered, screamed, her brown eyes blazing with absolute, unholy fury. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The children are asleep. Why are you laughing like a hyena in the gallery? Elena, wait, I was just, ow, stop. Thwack, thwack. I don't care what you were doing, she hissed, driving him backward with 3 quick, martial arts level broom thrusts to his ribs. You woke up Lita, you woke up Toby. If I have to spend another 40 minutes rocking those babies back to sleep, because you decided to have a midnight breakdown, I swear to heaven I will lock the wine cellar and throw the key into District 5. I'm going to my room. Lord have mercy, woman, put the broom down. Thomas wheezed, practically scrambling on all fours down the stone hallway, his priest robes trailing behind him like a retreating flag. Sister Elena lowered the broom, huffing softly as she smoothed down her apron. She cast one last, suspicious glare down the dark corridor before turning on her heel and tiptoeing back toward the children's hall, muttering under her breath about irresponsible old fools. Up on the high stone roof ledge, 10 feet above the gallery archway, I sat in absolute, pitch-black Zetsu. My aura was suppressed to absolute non-existence, my heart rate was lowered to a dead crawl, and my small 12-year-old frame was completely merged into the gargoyle's shadow. Sister Elena's sharp gaze swept right past my position without detecting a single flicker of life. I watched the empty, dark hallway where the corrupt, ex-hunter priest had just been thoroughly routed by a nurse with a broomstick. A quiet, breathless chuckle escaped my throat, completely silent, locked behind my master-level Zetsu. I pulled my poncho tight against the cold night wind, leaned my head back against the stone gargoyle, and closed my eyes. The syndicate was hunting in the Badlands. Kale was playing the ghost. The orphans were safe. And St. Jude's sanctuary was guarded by a swearing priest, a terrifying nun, and a 12-year-old monster who finally knew what he was fighting for. Chapter 44 Status and Progression. Location: St. Jude's Sanctuary, District 4. Time elapsed: 1 month. Active Hatsu, Oakhaven Aegis, Chronicle Replication. Perimeter status: 100% secure Zetsu disguise, flawless. Dossier: St. Jude's Sanctuary. Confidential record. Access restricted to director. Total active headcount, 32 children. Summary and resource allocation. Total children, 32. Average age, 8.5 years old. Monthly calories, approximately 60,000 kilocalories required. Primary risks, malnutrition, chemical lung burn, syndicate kidnapping. Primary funding, black market relic trade, local gambling, scrap arbitrage. Individual child profiles. Group Alpha, older ward and scrap detail. The senior line. Leo, sold to Gaston's organ brokers for 50,000 jenny by his older brother. Father Thomas broke the broker's jaw with a brass candlestick and dragged Leo out of an iron cage 3 days before the syndicate collapsed. Karen, sat frozen for 16 hours on a high-sorting crane in District 3, holding her mother's hand after a pipe burst flooded their shift with toxic solvent. Axe, left face down in a rusted iron dumpster after getting caught in a gang crossfire. Sister Elena spent 4 hours pulling 16 hot copper fragments out of his leg. Vesper, abandoned under an engine block at an auto stripping yard as a toddler. He walked 4 miles through a dust storm holding a broken transistor radio until he collapsed on the chapel steps. Cora, pulled from an illegal underground cotton carding cellar with lungs full of white fibers. She stays inside now, mending 31 sets of patched clothes. Gideon, a former street lookout who lost 2 fingers to severe frostbite while forced to guard a gang's liquor stash during the blizzard of '84. The outfield detail. 1. Darius, hiding inside a cold stone furnace pipe while rival gangs torched his block. He didn't speak a single word for his first 6 months at the sanctuary. 2. Sora, left behind in an empty brick barracks when an unannounced labor audit deported her mother's entire unregistered factory shift overnight. 3. Bryn, escaped an illegal textile shed after the overseer locked the iron doors and fled the district to dodge a gambling debt. 4. Nia, found wandering the chemical marshlands, her throat raw and bleeding from inhaling sulfur fumes from the smelting pits. 5. Marco and John, twins trapped inside a submerged storm drain during a flash monsoon. Thomas waded chest deep into the black sludge to pull him out by their hair seconds apart. 6. Paz, caught stealing a hot loaf of rye bread from a market stall. Thomas paid the baker double, cursed the man out for threatening a kid, and dragged Paz home by the ear. 7. Tariq, found sleeping inside a crate of rotted citrus outside the central market grid, eating melon rinds to keep his stomach from cramping. 8. Hannah, found asleep inside a freight car bound for the slag furnace, her arms wrapped tightly around a box of waterlogged, ruined books. 9. Iris, blinded in her right eye when an industrial acid battery exploded in a refinement trench where she was picking copper wire. 10. IA, the lone survivor of an arson raid in District 5. Thomas found her sitting on a heap of smoldering ash, holding a charred wooden spoon and staring blankly at the grey clouds. 11. Nico, Sister Elena scooped him off the iron treads of a trash compacting truck 2 seconds before the driver engaged the engine. 12. Rocco, thrown into a plastic sorting bin as a newborn because of a twisted right ankle. He learned to crawl across scrap iron long before he could walk. 13. Ilas, rendered completely mute after witnessing a street execution in District 6. He communicates solely through fast hand signals with Jax, the nursery and toddlers. Zoe, found by Thomas when she was just 3 years old. Zoe was trapped inside a compressed scrap metal hopper that was about to be dropped into a smelting furnace. Hearing her screaming through the metal walls, Thomas jammed a crowbar into the gears, risking his own arms to haul her out before the crushers descended. Sasha, abandoned in an alley during a toxic chemical smog outbreak in Meteor City. Elena found him wrapped in a damp rag under a leaking pipe at age 4, suffering from severe lung inflammation. She carried him back through the smog on her back, nursing him with improvised air filters and medicine for 3 weeks until he recovered. Finnegan, rescued by both Thomas and Elena at age 5 from a local street fighting ring run by scrap traders, where young street kids were pitted against each other for scraps of food. Thomas paid off the ringleader with a valuable restored generator, while Elena tended to Finnegan's injuries and brought him home. Mina, Kaylin, and Remy, these 3 were childhood friends who survived together in the ruins of Sector 4. When a massive structural collapse buried an underground shanty town under tons of concrete, Mina, Kaylin, and Remy were trapped in a small air pocket beneath the rubble. The rescue: Thomas used his heavy excavation gear and ultrasonic sensors to locate the pocket, digging non-stop for 18 hours. Elena crawled through a collapsing 10-inch ventilation shaft to reach them first, keeping them hydrated and calm until Thomas cut through the rebar to pull all 3 out safely. Lita and Eli, twin siblings whose parents vanished into the waste fields. A local gang intended to sell them to off-world smugglers. Elena caught wind of the transaction through her street clinic contacts and staged a distraction, setting off smoke flares to snatch Lita and Eli from the back of a transport truck right before it left the city gate. Ollie and Etta, found by Thomas inside an abandoned cargo container in the central rail yards during a sub-zero winter freeze. The container had been locked from the outside. Thomas used an oxyacetylene torch to cut the lock just in time. Ollie was huddling over Etta to keep her warm, both suffering from severe hypothermia. Elena wrapped them in thermal blankets and carried them back to St. Jude's furnace room. Toby, left anonymously in a wooden crate on the steps of St. Jude during a heavy ash storm when he was a newborn. Attached to his blanket was a handwritten note reading simply, "Keep him safe from Meteor City." Thomas and Elena took him in without hesitation, feeding him synthesized milk and raising him as the sanctuary's youngest boy. Lyra, discovered at age 2 by Elena during a torrential flash flood in the lower drainage canals. Lyra was clinging to a floating piece of driftwood in the rushing water. Elena tied a rope around her waist, jumped into the sewage current, and grabbed Lyra seconds before the water emptied into the deep sump pits. 32 names, 32 mouths. Not a single one of M is going to die on my watch as long as I can draw breath, cheat at cards, or steal copper from the mafia. God help anyone who tries to take M. Chapter 45, The Black Thread in the Scrap. October 1986, The Outfield. The autumn wind carried a sharp, metallic bite as it swept across Sector 9, a desolate graveyard where discarded industrial machinery sat rusting under the grey sky of Meteor City. It had been 3 months since Kale went dark into the Badlands. Inside St. Jude's, the daily routine remained unchanged: morning soup, peeling roots, and keeping 32 children from killing themselves on the scrap heaps. Today, I was assigned to lead a 4-person scrap detail: Leo, MIA, and 2 younger boys. We were hunting for copper wiring inside a collapsed automated rail car resting at the base of a 40-foot mountain of crushed iron. "Ren, look at this," Leo yelled, waving a rusted wrench from atop the rail car. "There's a whole junction box inside. We can get at least 3 kilos of clean brass out of this." "Keep your voice down, Leo," I called back smoothly, keeping my small frame slouched against a rusted beam. Sector 9 borders District 3. The scavengers around here don't share. My nodes were locked tight in a flawless, silent zetsu. Outwardly, I looked like a frail, 12-year-old orphan in a faded poncho. Inwardly, my passive gyo was flared behind my pupils, constantly sweeping a 200-meter radius. Then, my breath caught the presence. It wasn't an aggressive aura. In fact, it wasn't a visible aura at all. It was a total, unnatural absence of sound, a ghost-like presence moving across the upper ridge of the Junk Mountain 40 feet above us. Someone is using Zetsu, my transmigrator mind alerted instantly. And not the amateur, leaky Zetsu of a street thug. This is refined, effortless, and cold. I didn't turn my head. I didn't raise my hands. I simply shifted my weight slightly, positioning myself between the collapsed railcar where MIA and Leo were digging and the upper ridge. Through the gaps of a rusted iron crane chassis above us, a figure stepped into view. He couldn't have been more than 13 or 14 years old. He wore a simple, dark oversized coat, his dark hair falling messy over a forehead that carried no headband yet. He held a small, leather-bound book under his arm, reading it quietly while balancing effortlessly on a razor-thin iron girder overlooking the valley. My heart skipped a single, calculated beat. HIGH Tension Threat Assessment, Outfield. Subject, Crollo Lucifer. Current role, Founding Leader of the Emerging Phantom Troop. Aura Status, Flawless Zetsu. Threat Level, EXTREME. Crollo Lucifer. In 1986, the Phantom Troop was in its embryonic stage, a group of talented, angry, and brilliant orphans from Meteor City forming an unbreakable pact against the world that rejected them. He wasn't the ruthless spider-head who would massacre the Kurta clan years later. But even now, as a teenager reading a book on a junk pile, the quiet, terrifying density of his presence was unmistakable. The glance. Crollo stopped reading. Slowly, his dark, abyss-like eyes drifted down from the pages of his book, landing directly on the collapsed railcar below. "Hey, kid, help me pull this door," Leo shouted from inside the car, entirely unaware that a future S-class calamity was standing 40 feet above his head. "Hold on, Leo," I replied in a normal, slightly breathless child's voice, stepping forward to grab the edge of the iron door. As I pulled, I let my gaze, accidentally, wander up toward the crane chassis. Our eyes met. For 3 long, agonizing seconds, the wind in Sector 9 seemed to stop entirely. Crollo's dark eyes didn't hold malice. They held something far more dangerous, curiosity. He was assessing me. He didn't see an aura. My Zetsu was absolute, backed by my dual soul foundation. But his street-honed instincts were sharp enough to register that my posture, my balance, and the way I placed my feet in the gravel were entirely unnatural for an ordinary orphan. He's testing if I flinch, my mind calculated instantly. If I flare my aura or draw a weapon, I confirm I'm a threat or a mainland operative. If I act like a normal kid, he loses interest. I didn't flinch. I didn't break Zetsu. Instead, I let out a tired, childish grunt, slipped on the wet gravel on purpose, and dropped onto one knee, making it look like the heavy iron door was far too heavy for my weak 12-year-old arms. "Ouch," I muttered, rubbing my elbow in the dirt. The disengagement. High above on the iron girder, Crollo observed my clumsy fall. The quiet, intense curiosity in his dark eyes slowly faded, replaced by his usual calm, detached indifference. To him, I was just another weak, struggling orphan trying to drag scrap out of the mud to survive another day in District 4. He closed his leather-bound book with a soft snap. Without making a single sound, Crollo turned on his heel and walked along the rusted crane arm, vanishing into the grey mist of Sector 9 as if he had never been there at all. I stayed on one knee in the dirt for 5 full seconds after his presence completely disappeared from my passive perimeter. Phew. A single drop of cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck. Ren, you okay? Leo called out, poking his head out of the rail car. You got a lift with your legs, man. I'm fine, Leo, I said, pushing myself up and wiping the mud from my poncho. A small, dry smirk appeared on my face as I grabbed the iron door once more. Just slipped on the gravel. The Phantom Troop was moving in the shadows of Meteor City. The world was beginning to turn toward its canon timeline. But out here in Sector 9, my shield remained unbroken, my secrets remained buried, and the spider had passed by without catching a thread. '46. Stress Relief. November 1986, 2 a.m. 3 days after the silent standoff with Crollo Lucifer in Sector 9, the night air over St. Jude's Sanctuary was thick with a biting, freezing drizzle. I sat on the roof ledge in my usual ghost-like zetsu, staring at the empty courtyard below. My mind was a fried wire. 3 months of playing a week. Frail, clumsy 12-year-old, peeling radishes, getting beaten at tag by 5-year-olds, hiding my physical strength, and suppressing every single instinct of a battle-hardened transmigrator, had brought my sanity to its absolute limit. Click. The faint sound of an iron boot scraping against stone echoed from the eastern church wall. My eyes snapped open, a flash of cold adrenaline shot through my veins. Intruders. My micro-level Gyo instantly flared behind my pupils, scanning the perimeter wall. Was it the Phantom Troop? Was it the Syndicate's elite purge squad? I focused my vision through the dark rain. 4 men were scrambling over the stone wall, breathing heavily, carrying rusted crowbars, heavy iron pipes, and crude hunting knives. Their aura nodes were completely closed. No nen, no refined combat posture. No syndicate discipline. They weren't hunters, they weren't spiders. They were just 4 ordinary, bottom-feeding street thugs from a neighboring scrap gang, looking to raid Father Thomas's food storage and steal the week's copper haul. The permission. Clack, clack. The gallery door opened behind me. Father Thomas stepped onto the roof, clutching an unlit cigarette in his teeth. He leaned against the stone gargoyle, looking down at the 4 thugs creeping across the courtyard toward the storage shed. Syndicate, I whispered, my voice completely flat, my hands instinctively reaching beneath my poncho toward my iron braces. Thomas squinted through the rain, took the cigarette out of his mouth, and spat over the ledge. Nah, just local scavengers from District 5, Thomas grunted, leaning his chin on his palm. He turned his head to look at me, eyeing my twitching fingers, the dark circles under my eyes, and the terrifying, built-up pressure radiating from my soul. The old priest let out a long, quiet chuckle. You look like you're about to pop a vein, kid, Thomas said, a crooked, knowing smirk spreading across his face. Go on, get some stretching in, relieve some of that tension. He knew the absolute mental exhaustion I had been carrying for 3 months, playing the role of a frail, polite little orphan for Sister Elena and the kids. I slowly turned my head toward him, my eyes widening into a pair of dark, unhinged saucers. Really, I murmured, a slow, terrifying smile creeping across my face. Yeah, Thomas grunted, waving his hand dismissively as he turned to walk back inside. Just don't kill, okay? I don't feel like digging 4 graves in the freezing rain at 2 in the morning. The playground. Don't kill them, I repeated into the dark, my voice rising into an excited, manic whisper. Got it. No killing. Just playtime. Tactical entertainment profile. Targets: 4 non-nen street intruders. Condition: no nen combat, no fatal blows, pure kinetic venting. Objective: complete mental stress relief after 90 days of acting frail. I didn't drop down silently. I didn't use Zetsu. I leapt off the 3-story roof, slamming down directly into the center of the courtyard with a heavy, echoic thud that kicked up a wave of wet gravel. The 4 thugs spun around in shock, raising their iron pipes and flashlights. What the hell? The lead thug hissed, shining his yellow flashlight beam directly onto my face. It's just a kid. I stood in the freezing rain, my head tilted slightly, wet hair plastered across my forehead. My eyes burned with a chaotic, joyful light that made all 4 men instinctively step back in terror. Hey, I cooed, stepping forward with a wide, terrifying grin. Come play with me, intruders. Ha ha ha, you have no idea. 3 months. 3 months of peeling radishes. The kid's crazy, the second thug yelled, swinging a heavy iron pipe straight at my head. Shut him up. The beat down. I didn't even bother drawing Oakhaven Aegis. Using Nen on these 4 would be an insult to the art. I leaned back by 2 inches, letting the iron pipe whistle past my nose. Step. I slid inside his guard, grabbed his wrist with my 12-year-old hand, and twisted his momentum downward. Crack thud. I slammed his face directly into the wet cobblestones, using his own weight to disarm him. Before he could even scream, I grabbed his collar, spun his body like a ragdoll, and hurled him 10 feet across the courtyard straight into the wooden rain barrel. Splash crash. What the fuck? The leader screamed, drawing a heavy hunting knife and lunging at my chest. He's a monster. Faster, you have to be faster. I giggled, ducking under the blade's sweep with a fluid, effortless sidestep. I drove a rock-solid palm strike into his solar plexus, suppressing my physical power just enough to shatter his breath without cracking his ribs. Oof. The leader doubled over, his eyes bulging as all the air erupted from his lungs. I grabbed the back of his leather jacket, spun him around, and delivered a swift, theatrical sweep to his ankles that sent him flipping upside down into the mud. Thud. The remaining 2 thugs froze in absolute horror. In less than 15 seconds, 2 of their crew were twitching in the dirt, beaten effortlessly by a 12-year-old child who was laughing like a lunatic in the rain. No way. Run, run, one of them shrieked, dropping his crowbar and scrambling back toward the wall. Leaving so soon, I called out, blurring across the wet cobblestones with raw physical speed. I grabbed both of their collars from behind, dragged them backward, and slammed their foreheads together with a sickeningly satisfying clack. They both went instantly cross-eyed, collapsing into a heap on top of the leader. The relief. 2:12 a.m. The courtyard was quiet again, save for the patter of rain and the heavy, pathetic groaning of 4 thoroughly broken scavengers lying in a muddy pile. I stood over them, my hands resting on my hips, taking a long, deep, satisfying breath of the cold night air. The suffocating mental weight, the built-up frustration of playing the frail orphan, the tension of meeting Crollo, all of it had melted away into pure, kinetic satisfaction. My mind felt crystal clear. My soul felt light as a feather. Ah, I sighed happily, wiping a drop of rain from my cheek. That felt so good. Up on the gallery balcony, Father Thomas leaned over the railing, tossing 4 lengths of thick hemp rope down to the courtyard. Nice work, brat, Thomas grunted, taking a slow swig from his bottle. Tie 'em up to the gate post. In the morning, Elena can make chop firewood for a week to pay for the rain barrel. I picked up the ropes with a wide, cheerful smile, waving up at the old priest. Thanks for the permission, old man, I cheered, grabbing the leader by his boot and dragging him across the mud like a sack of potatoes. Best bedtime story ever. Chapter 47, The Angry Angel. 7 a.m., the courtyard. The morning rain had cleared, leaving the courtyard washed clean and smelling of wet stone. Tied securely to the heavy iron gatepost were the 4 District 5 intruders from last night. They were bruised, covered in dried mud, and shivering in their wet clothes. The leader had a lump the size of a pigeon's egg on his forehead, staring at the gravel with absolute, shell-shocked defeat. I stood near the wash basin, quietly drying my hands with a towel, feeling light, rested, and completely refreshed after last night's physical release. Clack, clack, thud. The heavy oak doors of the sanctuary opened. Sister Elena stepped into the sunlight, carrying a wooden basket of laundry. She froze mid-step, her brown eyes widening as she took in the sight of 4 grown men bound like holiday hams to the church gate. Slowly, her gaze drifted from the intruders, across the courtyard, and landed square on me. Then, her head snapped to the right, locking onto Father Thomas, who was leaning against the porch railing in his unbuttoned cassock, lazily trying to light a damp cigarette. Thomas felt her gaze. He froze, the match burning down toward his fingers. What? Thomas blurted out instantly, holding his hands up in self-defense. It wasn't me, I didn't touch, It was Ren, the kid did the whole thing. The true hierarchy. Sister Elena didn't blink, she set the laundry basket down on a stone bench with a heavy, deliberate thud. She knew I was Kale's apprentice. She knew I wasn't an ordinary child, and she knew I was fully capable of handling myself in a fight. She didn't blame me for protecting the sanctuary. Instead, her sharp, brown eyes locked back onto the old priest with a glare so terrifyingly intense it could have melted iron. She reached behind the laundry bench and grabbed her trusty wooden sweeping broom. Yes, Ren handled them, Sister Elena said, her voice dropping into a deceptively calm, dangerous whisper. Because you ordered him to stay up all night on the freezing roof, you lazy, rotten old man. Wait, Elena, hold on. Swoosh thwack. Ouch, woman, be reasonable, Thomas shrieked, jumping backward as the broom bristles slammed squarely into his chest. Reasonable, Elena declared, advancing on him like an angry angel descending from the heavens, wielding the broom like an S-rank hunter weapon. You let a 12-year-old fight 4 grown men while you stood on the balcony drinking grain alcohol. You corrupt, irresponsible, shameless bastard. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Ren, help me, Thomas yelled, retreating frantically down the stone porch, ducking and weaving behind the support pillars. Use your HATSU. Defend your master's friend. I stood completely still by the wash basin, holding my towel, watching the spectacle with an unblinking, deadpan expression. In my mind, my transmigrator soul murmured silently. Sorry, Thomas, even my Oakhaven Aegis and Specialist Library combined cannot stand against the wrath of Sister Elena. Weapon ranking in the known universe. 1. Sister Elena, S. Wooden Broom. 2. Poor Man's Rose. 3. Hyakushiki Cannon. 4. Black Symphony. At that moment, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the most dangerous object in Meteor City wasn't a mafia rocket launcher, nor was it a specialist Hatsu. It was Sister Elena's broomstick. Forced labor. After thoroughly routing the corrupt priest and forcing him to apologize to the chapel cross, Sister Elena turned her attention back to the 4 trembling intruders at the gate. She marched over, the broom resting casually over her shoulder, looking down at them like a merciful saint who had just finished beating a demon. "You 4, Elena said, her warm, motherly voice returning as if nothing had happened. "Since you broke our rain barrel and tried to steal our winter rice, you will chop firewood, carry water from the well, and clean the chapel floor until noon." The leader of the thugs looked up at her, then glanced at me standing in the corner with a serene smile, and then at Thomas, who was sitting on the steps rubbing a massive bruise on his arm. "We'll chop the wood," the leader blubbered desperately, tears welling up in his eyes. "We'll clean the whole church. Just don't let the kid or the broom lady touch us again." "Good," Sister Elena smiled brightly, turning toward the kitchen. "Breakfast is in 20 minutes. Wash your hands first." I walked over to the porch, sitting down on the step next to the grumbling, beaten priest. Thomas pulled a bruised cigarette from his pocket, lit it with a trembling hand, and took a long, miserable drag, glaring at the kitchen door. "She's a demon, Ren," Thomas muttered under his breath, wincing as he touched his shoulder. "A holy, terrifying demon. She keeps the roof over your head, old man," I replied smoothly, a tiny, genuine smirk appearing on my face as I watched the 4 thugs frantically grabbing axes to chop wood. "And honestly, you deserved every hit." Thomas snorted, blowing a cloud of smoke into the morning air, but couldn't hide the small, crooked grin tugging at his lips. The unwritten rule of Meteor City. By noon, the 4 District 5 scavengers had chopped a pile of oak logs higher than the church fence. Their hands were blistered, their clothes drenched in sweat, but their eyes no longer held the desperation of cornered animals. They were sitting in a circle on the courtyard stones, inhaling massive wooden bowls of Sister Elena's thick vegetable and barley stew as if they hadn't seen food in a week. I sat on the porch railing, swinging my legs lazily, watching them eat. "They were starving," Father Thomas muttered, settling down next to me on the wooden bench. He was rubbing the back of his neck where Elena's broom had left a long red mark, but his gaze on the 4 thugs was surprisingly calm. "Didn't you notice their wrists? Skin sticking straight to the bone. They didn't come to raid the copper for booze, Ren. District 5's soup kitchen burned down last week. They came for the bread." I paused, looking down at my hands. Starvation. It was something I had intellectually understood from reading about Meteor City, but living inside it was entirely different. "Is it always like this?" I asked softly, keeping my voice low. "People risking their lives for a sack of moldy barley?" "Every single day," Thomas said, blowing a thin ring of smoke into the clear afternoon sky. "The dump doesn't care if you're 12, 60, good, or evil. When the belly is empty, a man will try to rob an orphanage with a rusted pipe, even if he knows there's a priest with a shotgun inside." He tilted his head toward the chapel porch, where Sister Elena was pouring clean drinking water into 4 tin cups for the scavengers, speaking to them with that same patient, motherly warmth she gave to the youngest orphans. "Look at her," Thomas grunted, a rare, soft expression breaking through his weathered, sarcastic face. "Elena is a strange creature for a trash heap like Meteor City. She's a saint, or a fool. Maybe both." "How did you 2 even meet?" I asked, genuinely curious. "An ex-syndicate combatant who knows Nen, and a sister running a sanctuary in the middle of nowhere. A priest and a rebel." Thomas leaned his head back against the stone pillar, his eyes tracking a solitary crow drifting over the scrapyard horizon. 10 years ago, Thomas began, his voice dropping an octave into a low, quiet rumble. "I wasn't a father. I was just a stray dog with a gun and a Nen contract, working security for one of the major disposal syndicates in District 3. My job was simple. shoot anyone who tried to scavenge from the high-tier garbage trucks before the mafia sorted through the electronics. He tapped the ash off his cigarette. One morning, a girl no older than 18 marched straight past our armed perimeter. No weapons, no nen, just a wooden cart and an iron wheel. She started loading bags of discarded grain onto her cart right under our noses. I smirked slightly. Sister Elena. Sister Elena, Thomas nodded, a wry smile touching his lips. My squad captain pointed his rifle at her head and told her to drop the bags or get shot. Do you know what she did? Hit him with a broom. Thomas chuckled loudly, a raspy sound from deep in his throat. Not yet, she didn't have the broom back then. She just looked him dead in the eye, held up a bag of flour, and said, "There are 40 orphans dying of typhus 2 miles north. If you want to shoot me for feeding 'em, you'd better shoot straight, because if I live, I'm coming back for the rest of these bags." Thomas shook his head, staring at the glowing tip of his cigarette. My captain was a ruthless bastard. He took aim at her chest. I didn't think. I just drew my sidearm, put a bullet through my captain's shoulder, dragged Elena onto her cart, and ran. I turned my head to look at the old priest in surprise. You betrayed your syndicate for a girl stealing grain. I was tired, Ren, Thomas murmured softly. I had spent 15 years killing for trash. When I looked at her, I saw someone who was actually trying to build something in a place where everything goes to rot. I abandoned my post, gave up my syndicate standing, and came with her to District 4 to lay these chapel bricks with our own hands. He glanced over at Elena, who was now wrapping clean bandages around one of the intruder's bruised wrists, scolding him gently for not washing his scrape first. She doesn't care where you came from, Thomas whispered. Syndicate, mafia, orphan, or intruder. If you're standing in front of her and you're human, she'll offer you a bowl of soup before she asks your name. He looked back at me, his dark eyes sharp and knowing. That's why she didn't care that you beat those guys up last night, Ren. She knows you're Kale's apprentice. She knows you carry dark, violent things inside you, but as long as you're under this roof, she'll treat you like a kid who deserves a home. Don't ever forget that. I sat in silence for a long time, the cool wind blowing through my hair, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and Elena's vegetable stew. A sanctuary in the middle of a war zone. I looked down at the 4 scavengers, who were now bowing their heads to Elena in tearful gratitude as she handed them 4 loaves of wrapped bread to take back to District 5. I won't, I said quietly, a small, genuine warmth settling into my chest. I won't forget. Chapter 48, The Web in the Mud. November 1986, 1:30 p.m. The midday heat in District 4 was thick and suffocating, hanging over the church like a heavy wet blanket. I was leaning back against the cool stone wall under the porch archway, taking a quiet break after hauling 6 heavy barrels of well water for Sister Elena. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I had my eyes closed, using the quiet moment to run a micro thread of aura through my physical nodes, refining my internal 10 efficiency without letting a single drop leak outward. Bang! The wooden courtyard gate was slammed open so hard the iron hinges shrieked. Help, Sister Elena, help! 2 orphans, Marco and Sora, came sprinting across the gravel, their faces pale, breathless, and streaked with tears. Toby tripped over the porch step, scrambling on his hands and knees. Sister Elena rushed out from the chapel kitchen, dropping her dish towel in shock. Marco, Sora, what happened? Where is Leo? It's Leo, Marco sobbed, pointing wildly toward the eastern boundary road near the District 3 border market. Some scary people. Leo accidentally bumped into them near the scrap market and they're beating him up. He's bleeding, sister. Elena gasped, her face draining of color. Dear Lord, Thomas, where is Thomas? He went to the market 2 hours ago to trade for salt. Sora cried. Elena turned, her hands trembling as she grabbed 3 older children near the well. You 3, run to the market right now. Find Father Thomas and bring him back immediately. Hurry. She turned to sprint toward the gate herself, her eyes wide with panic. I stood up from the stone wall, stepping smoothly in front of her. Sister, I said, my voice steady, flat, and completely devoid of panic. Don't worry, stay here with the younger kids. Elena blinked, looking down at my small, 12-year-old frame in shock. Ren, no, you can't go alone, those are adult strangers. Leave it to me, I interrupted gently, placing a firm, reassuring hand on her arm. Show me where he is, Marco. Before Elena could protest, I turned and sprinted through the sanctuary gates, Marco and Sora frantically running beside me to lead the way. The border alley. We cleared 4 blocks of crumbling brick buildings in less than 3 minutes. The eastern boundary road was a narrow, filth-streaked alleyway where District 4 met District 3, a lawless strip where market traders, junk scavengers, and stray fighters often crossed paths. There, Marco whimpered, stopping behind a rusted iron dumpster and pointing down the alley. Right there. In the middle of the muddy alley, 13-year-old Leo was curled into a tight, bleeding ball on the ground, his arms wrapped desperately around his head. His clothes were torn, and a fresh cut above his eye was dripping blood into the dirt. Standing over him were 2 figures. My feet slowed to a silent, deliberate march. My passive gyo sharpened behind my pupils, and my heart dropped straight into an icy abyss. HIGH Tension Threat Assessment, Alleyway. SUBJECT1, Finks Magcub. Appearance, green tracksuit, slicked hair, no brows, intense aura. SUBJECT2, Phaeton Portor. Appearance, dark oversized coat, skull bandana over mouth, cold eyes. Group, early founding members of the Phantom Troop. Danger level, absolute catastrophe. Finks was standing over Leo, cracking his knuckles with a scowl of pure annoyance, his track pants spattered with a drop of mud from where Leo had bumped into him. Beside him stood Phaeton, his hands tucked deep into his dark coat, his narrow, golden-gray eyes staring down at the bleeding orphan with complete, sociopathic boredom. Pathetic little trash rat, Finks grunted, raising a heavy, leather-clad boot to stomp down on Leo's ribs once more. Look at my pants, you ran right into me, brat. The confrontation. Stop. My voice cut through the quiet alleyway, not a scream, not a cry, but a cold, flat command that carried an unnatural weight. Finks' boot hovered an inch above Leo's chest. Slowly, both Finks and Phaeton turned their heads toward the entrance of the alley. I stepped out from the shadow of the dumpster, standing 30 feet away. My nodes were locked tight in an absolute, impenetrable zetsu, hiding every trace of my specialist aura. Outwardly, I looked like a 12-year-old orphan in a faded poncho. Inwardly, my mind was running high-speed tactical simulations at 1,000 miles an hour. Why? My inner soul raged, my eyes locking onto the 2 future Riordan members with a mixture of disbelief and quiet, rising fury. Why are you beating a fragile, defenseless kid? Ha! Finks raised an eyebrow, dropping his foot and turning his broad shoulders toward me. Another brat from the local dump. You got a problem, kid. Phaeton didn't speak, he just shifted his weight slightly, his narrow eyes locking onto my posture with that same unsettling, predator-like sharpness I had seen in Crollo 3 days ago. Leo groaned from the mud, coughing weakly. Ah, Ren, run. They're crazy. I didn't run. I took 3 steps forward, stopping right between the 2 monsters and the bleeding boy, my dark eyes fixed square on Fink's face. He's 13, I said, my voice dangerously calm. He accidentally bumped into you in a crowded alley. Why beat a fragile child half to death over a drop of mud? Chapter 49, The Debt of St. Jude's. Wait, Finks grunted, his eyes narrowing as he looked around the maze of rusted shipping containers. Where the hell were we supposed to meet Crollo again? Phaeton pulled his bandana up over his nose, his raspy voice dripping with annoyance. 3rd intersection past the water tower. You took a wrong turn 2 blocks ago, idiot. I didn't take a wrong turn, the damn alleyways all look the same. Finks growled, cracking his knuckles. It was then that they had bumped into Leo, a hungry, startled boy who accidentally knocked over their supply crate in his hurry to escape the 2 intimidating strangers. In his frustration at being lost, Finks had lashed out, beating the boy into the mud. You got a big mouth for a kid sitting inside Zetsu, Finks sneered, stepping away from Leo and turning his full attention toward me. You think having a little aura control makes you special? Let's see how quiet your Zetsu is when I break your arm, Phaeton added, his narrow eyes flashing with dangerous amusement. Before I could answer, Finks lunged forward, driving a heavy, nen-infused fist straight toward my chest. The exchange. I didn't drop my cover, but I couldn't afford to take a direct hit from Fink's raw physical power either. Step. I slid my feet across the wet gravel, weaving under his punch by a fraction of an inch. I flared a micro-layer of Ken across my forearms, deflecting Phaeton's sudden low kick from behind with a sharp clang. That sounded like 2 iron beams colliding. HIGH tension exchange, outfield alley. Combatants, Ren versus Finks and Phaeton. Ren's strategy, defensive parrying, 0 lethal intent, keep cover intact. Troop reaction, rising curiosity and intrigue at Ren's physical efficiency. Ho, Finks raised an eyebrow, his eyes lighting up with genuine surprise as I repelled his follow-up jab. Your defense is sharp, brat. What kind of Hatsu is that? Phaeton shifted his weight effortlessly, his speed doubling as he darted around my flank like a black shadow. He didn't even open his nodes fully. Impressive control for a street rat. For 2 intense minutes, the narrow alley became a flurry of suppressed kinetic violence. I didn't attack, I strictly redirected their strikes, using fluidity and weight distribution tricks from my transmigrator training to keep both of them at bay. Phaeton backed off 3 paces, a dark, rare smirk appearing behind his skull bandana. Hey, kid, Finks grinned, wiping a drop of sweat from his forehead. You're pretty good. Where'd you learn to fight like that? Actually, forget that. You want to join us? We could use a shield like you. I'm good where I am, I replied flatly, keeping my guard up. Finks snorted, stepping forward again. That wasn't really a question. The symbol on the robe. That's enough. Father Thomas came skidding into the alley, out of breath, his cassock covered in grey dust. He shoved his massive frame directly between me and the 2 troop members, his hands raised in a protective wall. Finks scoffed, cocking his fist back. Get out of the way, old priest, before I. Finks froze. Phaeton's narrow eyes suddenly locked onto the faded, silver-embroidered symbol on the left breast of Thomas's priest cassock, a simple, stylized cross wrapped in olive branches. The mark of St. Jude's sanctuary. Phaeton reached out, catching Finks' arm by the sleeve. Stop. Finks blinked, looking at Phaeton in confusion. What? Why? The symbol, Phaeton muttered, his raspy voice dropping into a quiet, solemn tone. The sanctuary in District 4. Finks looked down at the silver emblem on Thomas's chest, and the arrogance on his face slowly melted into a strange, quiet recognition. Years ago, long before the troop was officially formed, a few of the younger orphans from their block, including Pakunoda and young Franklin, had been treated for severe chemical burns and typhus by a gentle, tireless nurse named Sister Elena. She had never asked for their names, nor had she ever asked who they belonged to. She had simply fed them, wrapped their wounds, and sent them back into the city with bread in their pockets. The mark of St. Jude's was one of the very few things in Meteor City the troops silently respected. "TCH. What a shame," Finks grumbled, relaxing his stance and letting his arms drop to his sides. "So you're from that place?" "Sister Elena's sanctuary," Phaeton murmured softly, taking a step back into the shadows of the alley. "We don't shed blood on her grounds, or her people." Finks kicked a loose stone against the brick wall, turning his back on us. "Hey, old man, have you seen a black-haired boy with sharp eyes named Crollo pass through here?" "He went toward the Sector 7 rail line an hour ago," Thomas answered quietly, his breathing still heavy. "Right, let me know if you change your mind about joining us, kid," Finks called over his shoulder, throwing a wave as he walked away. "You've got talent." Phaeton gave me one last, lingering glance through the dark rain before vanishing into the side street after Finks, leaving the alley completely silent once more. The Shield's legacy. I slowly lowered my hands, my nodes sealing back into an absolute, silent zetsu. "They just left?" I asked softly, turning to look at Thomas in genuine surprise. "Just like that." Thomas let out a long, ragged exhale, pulling a crumpled cigarette from his pocket with a trembling hand and lighting it with a hiss of sulfur. "They're monsters, Ren," Thomas grunted, blowing a cloud of thick blue smoke into the chilly air as he knelt down to check on Leo. "But even monsters in Meteor City remember who fed them when they were starving." He looked up at me, a crooked, tired smile appearing on his face. "Sister Elena saved a lot of broken kids in this dump 10 years ago," Thomas murmured softly, picking up the bleeding boy into his arms. "Turns out her kindness is a stronger shield than any Nen contract we could ever conjure." I stood in the quiet alleyway, looking at the empty street where the 2 future Spider members had vanished. Sister Elena's kindness, I thought silently, falling into step beside Thomas as we carried Leo back toward the church. In a world driven by aura, power, and ruthless violence, the safest wall in Meteor City was built by an unarmed woman with a gentle heart, and a very heavy wooden broom. Chapter 50. Thomas's Miracle. November 1986, 2:15 p.m. The heavy oak doors of the sanctuary slammed open. Father Thomas rushed into the main hall, his boots echoing loudly across the stone floor, carrying Leo's limp, bloodied body in his arms. I was right behind him, scanning our back trail to ensure no one had followed us from the boundary alley. "Elena, clear the front altar," Thomas bellowed, his usual sarcasm entirely stripped away, replaced by the commanding roar of a former hunter. Sister Elena ran out from the kitchen, a stack of clean linen falling from her hands as she saw the boy. "Oh, merciful heavens, Leo!" The younger children, Marco, Lita, Toby, and a dozen others, crowded into the doorway, their eyes wide with terror as they saw the blood soaking through Thomas's cassock. A few of the youngest began to cry, clinging to each other in fear. Thomas gently laid the 13-year-old boy on the long wooden table in front of the stone altar. Leo's breathing was shallow and ragged, a terrible rattling sound coming from his chest. Finks hadn't just bruised him. The sheer kinetic force of the troop member's casual kick had shattered 3 ribs, and one was dangerously close to puncturing his lung. "His pulse is dropping, Thomas," Elena whispered frantically, her hands pressing a clean cloth against the gash on Leo's head. We need a surgeon. We need the clinic in District 2. District 2 is 5 miles away, Elena. He won't make it past the scrap fields, Thomas said grimly, his face pale and sweating. Lita tugged on my poncho, her tiny face streaked with tears. Ren, is Leo going to die? I looked at the dying boy, then at Sister Elena's desperate, hopeful eyes, and finally at Father Thomas, who was staring down at his own trembling, calloused hands. Thomas closed his eyes, letting out a long, ragged exhale. All right, kids, Thomas called out softly, his voice echoing through the quiet, tense sanctuary. Gather round the pews, close your eyes, hold hands, and pray for your brother. Who knows? Maybe God is actually listening today. The children immediately did as they were told, kneeling on the stone floor, their small voices rising in a quiet, tearful murmur of prayer. Sister Elena looked at Thomas in confusion. She knew Thomas had long ago lost his faith in divine intervention. But I didn't close my eyes. I kept my passive gyo focused entirely on the old, corrupt priest. And for the first time since I met him, Father Thomas opened his aura nodes. The corrupted priest's Hatsu. The air inside the sanctuary grew incredibly heavy, completely devoid of the chaotic, violent pressure I was used to feeling from Kale or the troop. This aura was deep, steady, and blindingly bright, a pure, golden white light that rolled off Thomas's broad shoulders like a physical wave. Nen analysis. FATHER Thomas. Affinity. Enhancement. Aura color. Golden white. HATSU name. Wine to water, water to blood. Function. Cellular regeneration via aura transmutation. Limitation. The user absorbs the exact equivalent of physical pain and fatigue that is healed from the target. Enhancement and transmutation. My transmigrator mind analyzed in shock. He's transmuting his aura into a regenerative cellular matrix, but using enhancement to force the body's natural healing process into overdrive. Thomas stepped up to the altar, raising his hands over Leo's shattered chest. I haven't used this since the Syndicate Wars, Thomas muttered under his breath, his eyes glowing with a fierce, unwavering golden light. Don't you dare die on my watch, kid. Hatsu, wine to water. A brilliant, warm light cascaded from Thomas's palms, sinking directly into Leo's broken body. Under the microscopic vision of my Gyo, I watched the miracle happen. The shattered fragments of Leo's ribs began to knit back together. The internal bleeding in his chest cavity was forcibly clotted and dissolved by the dense aura, and the deep lacerations on his skin sealed shut, leaving only smooth, pink scars behind. The children, peeking through their fingers, gasped in absolute awe as the golden light illuminated the dark church hall. To them, it wasn't Nen. It was a genuine, biblical miracle performed by their foul-mouthed priest. But I saw the price. As Leo's breathing deepened and steadied, the color violently drained from Father Thomas's face. For every bone he knit, Thomas's own knees buckled. For every drop of blood he replaced, a sharp, agonizing gasp tore from the priest's throat. His Hatsu didn't erase the injury. It transferred the sheer, agonizing pain and physical exhaustion of the trauma directly into his own nervous system. Leo's eyes fluttered open, clear and bright. Father. Hey, brat, Thomas whispered, a weak, trembling smile on his face. Told you. Not to run. In the alleys. Thud. The golden light snapped off. Thomas collapsed backward like a felled oak tree, hitting the stone floor of the altar with a heavy crash, completely unconscious. The price of a miracle. Thomas, Sister Elena screamed, rushing around the altar and dropping to her knees beside the fallen priest. I was there a second later, placing 2 fingers against the carotid artery on Thomas's thick neck. "He's alive," I said quickly, my voice steady to calm the panicked orphans. "His pulse is strong, but his body went into extreme shock. He took all of Leo's pain into himself." Elena looked up at me, tears streaming freely down her face, her hands hovering over Thomas's chest as if she didn't know where to touch him. He healed him, Ren. He always said his hunter abilities were only for killing." "He lied," I said softly, looking down at the snoring, foul-mouthed, black market-dealing old bastard who had just nearly killed himself to save a 13-year-old scrap scavenger. "His Hatsu is purely meant to save lives, sister. He's just too stubborn to admit he's a good man." Elena let out a wet, breathless laugh, wiping her eyes with her apron as she gently smoothed back Thomas's gray hair. "Okay, children, everyone up," Elena called out, her voice regaining its warm, commanding strength. "Leo needs water, and Father Thomas needs his bed. Let's carry them both." As the children rushed forward, carefully helping Leo sit up and grabbing Thomas's arms and legs to drag the snoring giant down the hall, I stood quietly by the altar. I looked at the spot where the golden light had faded. Kale fought the darkness by becoming a monster that the monsters feared. But Thomas fought the darkness by carrying its pain on his own shoulders, so the children didn't have to. A master who punishes himself with guilt, and a priest who trades his own life for theirs, I thought, a deep, profound respect settling into my chest. I pulled my poncho tight, turning to walk back toward the front doors. The miracle was over, the children were safe. And the wall of District 4 needed to go back on duty. Chapter 51, The Shadow of 1999. 11:45 p.m. The room smelled of iodine, wet wool, and stale tobacco. Father Thomas lay on his narrow cot in the church back room, snoring heavily, his chest rising and falling in deep, ragged rhythms. The skin under his eyes was dark and bruised, the lingering shock of taking 3 shattered ribs and internal hemorrhaging straight into his own nervous system. I sat on a wooden stool beside his bed, keeping a quiet, vigilant vigil in absolute zetsu. Squeak. The wooden door swung open quietly. Sister Elena stepped inside, carrying a steaming mug of herbal tea. She set the mug on the small bedside table, then pulled a chair up next to mine, looking down at the sleeping giant with a mix of quiet tenderness and exasperation. "He always acts so tough," Elena whispered, her voice soft in the dark room. "He tells everyone his nen was built for slaughter. But the very first time I met him 10 years ago, he used that exact same golden light to heal my shattered shoulder after a syndicate raid." She smiled softly, reaching out to tuck the thick wool blanket around Thomas's shoulders. "He took my pain then, just like he took Leo's today. That's why I stayed with him, Ren. Because no matter how many curses come out of his mouth, or how many black market deals he makes, Thomas is a man who bleeds for people who have no one else to bleed for them." She stood up slowly, patting my shoulder gently. "Get some rest soon, Ren. You've had a long day." "Good night, sister," I replied quietly. The tactical calculation. When the heavy oak door clicked shut, the room returned to deep silence. I leaned my elbows on my knees, staring down at my small, 12-year-old hands in the dim moonlight. My transmigrator mind began running high-speed playback simulations of those 2 brutal minutes in the District 3 border alley. Tactical retrospective, PHINKS and FEITAN. Duration, 120 seconds. PHINKS mag cub, raw enhancement output, extreme physical torque. FEITAN portor, absurd acceleration, subtle, lethal angle adjustments. Conclusion: I survived strictly because I played 100% defensive. If Phaeton had used his umbrella blade or Finks had charged his Ripper cyclotron, my current physical body would have been pulverized. Am I strong enough? The thought hung cold and heavy in my chest. 1986 was just the beginning. In 13 years, in the canonical year of 1999, the main storyline of Hunter x Hunter would kick off. The Greed Island arc, the York New City auction massacre, the Chimera Ant crisis. Catastrophic events where even high-tier hunters died like flies. Right now, I could hold my own against teenage troop members using defensive parries. But was that enough to actually protect people when the real canon horrors unleashed? Or was I just surviving on borrowed time and street-level tricks? I closed my eyes, opening my inner specialist library, the mysterious, latent transmigrator structure buried deep within my soul. Can I copy Thomas's Hatsu? If I replicated wine to water, I would gain an absolute, high-tier emergency healing ability. But the restriction was brutal, taking the exact physical pain and trauma into my own body. Could my specialist soul endure that kind of shock while maintaining combat readiness? The priest awakes. Yo, little brat. A raspy, sleep-thickened voice broke the quiet. I opened my eyes. Father Thomas was staring up at the stone ceiling, his bloodshot eyes heavy with exhaustion. He didn't move his head, but his dry lips twitched into a weak scowl. Fetch me a cigarette, and a swig of that cheap altar wine in the bottom drawer, will ya? No wine, Thomas, I said flatly, pulling the crumpled pack of cigarettes from his jacket hanging on the wall. Sister Elena said if I let you drink before morning, she'll shave your head. Thomas let out a weak, raspy laugh that turned into a sore cough. TCH, tyrannical nun. I lit the cigarette with a match and handed it to him. He took a long, shaky drag, the orange ember lighting up the deep, tired lines etched into his face. He blew a grey cloud of smoke toward the dark rafters, staring into it as if looking back 20 years. You're wondering why a former blacklist hunter ended up wasting his life in a garbage dump, aren't you? Thomas grunted softly. I'm listening, I said, leaning back on my stool. The reason behind the light. When I took my hunter exam 20 years ago, Thomas murmured, tapping ash onto the stone floor, I wanted wealth, prestige, and power. I learned enhancement, bought high-end weapons, and took high-paying bounty contracts on the mainland. I thought I was invincible. He closed his eyes, taking another slow puff. Then I took a contract against an illegal organ syndicate in York New. We raided their warehouse, and I found 40 kids in iron cages. Most of them were already dead or broken beyond repair. My squad leader wanted to burn the warehouse to erase the evidence and take the bounty money. Thomas's voice dropped into a low, gravelly whisper. I killed my squad leader that night, but when I tried to treat those kids with basic medical kits, I didn't have the power. I watched 3 of them die in my arms because my aura was built purely to smash skulls, not to fix broken bodies. He looked over at me, his eyes burning with a raw, painful clarity. That's the day I created wine to water. I swore that if I was ever going to use my nen again, every drop of blood I spilled in combat would be balanced by a life I saved. I chose enhancement and transmutation not to become a god, but to carry the pain that these poor little bastards shouldn't have to feel. He took one last drag, crushing the cigarette butt against the bedpost. I came to Meteor City because this is where the world dumps its broken souls, Thomas said quietly. I'm not a saint, Ren. I'm just a guilty old bastard trying to balance his ledger before he dies. I sat in the dark room, listening to the old priest's heavy, steady breathing. The final condition of my specialist library clicked silently into place. I didn't just see his Hatsu, I understood the blood, the guilt, and the absolute conviction that forged it. Specialist Library, ABILITY recorded. Ability name, Wine to Water. Source, Father Thomas. Copied status, recorded, ready for replication. Compatibility, 100%. I stood up from the stool, gently taking the crushed cigarette butt from his hand and placing a fresh glass of water on his nightstand. Your ledger is clean, Thomas, I said softly, turning toward the door. Get some sleep, I'll take the roof shift. Thomas snorted softly, turning his head toward the wall. Don't get cocky, brat. And don't let Elena catch you up there. I stepped out into the chilly night air, pulling my poncho tight against the wind, my dark eyes staring out over the vast, shadowy horizon of Meteor City. The troop was out there. The future was coming. But as I jumped onto the high stone gargoyle of St. Jude's, my shield felt heavier, my library grew deeper, and my resolve to protect this tiny corner of the dark became absolute. Chapter 52, The Long Way Ahead. 2:30 a.m. The wind on the church roof was sharp enough to bite through wool, carrying the bitter tang of sulfur and burnt iron from the distant scrap fires of Sector 9. I sat cross-legged atop the stone gargoyle overlooking the quiet dark courtyard of St. Jude's. My body remained locked in an absolute, motionless zetsu, no heat, no sound, no leaking aura. With Father Thomas resting below and the 32 orphans fast asleep, I closed my eyes and turned my mind inward, opening my complete spiritual inventory. Ren, apprentice, status and capability. Physical age, 12 years old. Soul foundation, dual soul transmigrator. Nen category, specialist, natural affinity with enhancement. Current replicas, 1. Oakhaven Aegis, Instructor Kale. 2. Wine to Water, Father Thomas. Capacity slots, 2/3 active. Basic Nen control. 10. Mastered. Zetsu, Pinnacle, Ghost level. Ren, Upper Intermediate. Gyo, Flawless Micro Application. Ken, Shu, Intermediate. I reviewed the numbers with the cold, analytical detachment of a veteran strategist. On paper, my progress was absurd. In less than a year under Kale's brutal conditioning, I had mastered high-level Zetsu, developed an impenetrable defensive Hatsu in Oakhaven Aegis, and successfully copied Father Thomas's miracle healing Hatsu, Wine to Water. I had held my ground against 2 young, highly dangerous future Phantom Troop members without breaking my civilian disguise or getting myself killed. And yet, I looked down at my small, bandaged palms in the faint moonlight. It's still a long way to go. Tactical Gap Analysis, CANON Timeline. Time remaining, approximately 13 years until the canon events. Current limits, 1. Physical vessel, a 12-year-old body cannot output the raw aura reserve of a fully matured high-tier hunter. 2. Slot constraint, only 3 Hatsu replicas allowed at once. 3. Tactical vulnerability, 0 offensive Hatsu capability. In the grand hierarchy of the Hunter x Hunter universe, I was currently a sharp, deadly anomaly, a ghost hiding in plain sight. But against true calamities, a fully realized Crollo Lucifer, the royal guards of the Chimera Ants, or the upper echelon of the Hunter Association, my current aura reserves would be crushed like glass under a hammer. Defending against Finks and Phaeton for 2 minutes was a success of survival, not mastery. If either of them had pulled out their true, lethal Nen techniques, my young body would have been pushed to its absolute breaking point. I couldn't afford to get complacent. Not now, not in Meteor City. 13 years, I whispered into the freezing night air, watching my breath fog up before being swallowed by the dark. 13 years to build an unyielding foundation, to expand my aura capacity, to perfect my specialist library, and to mature this physical vessel into a fortress. I drew a long, slow breath, letting the freezing air fill my lungs, and released my Zetsu just enough to run a micro thread of 10 through every single node in my body, gently conditioning my aura channels while maintaining total silence. Below me, the quiet church slept under the stars. Kale was out in the Badlands, severing the Syndicate's bloody trail. Thomas was recovering from his sacrifice. Sister Elena was resting for another day of endless toil, and 32 children were dreaming of a tomorrow they were never supposed to have. I opened my eyes, my dark pupils reflecting the cold, distant stars over District 4. A long way to go, I thought with a small, resolute smirk, pulling my poncho tight against the wind. Good thing I've got plenty of time. Chapter 52 Status and Progression. Location: St. Jude's Sanctuary, District 4. Timeline: late 1986. Newly acquired, wine to water. Perimeter status: 100% secure guard duty active. Chapter 53, The Return of the Shadow. Early December 1986, winter in District 4. 5 months passed in the gray, steady rhythm of Meteor City. The late autumn chill had hardened into the freezing, unforgiving winter of District 4. Frost clung to the rusted iron girders, and biting winds swept off the trash plateaus. Over those months, St. Jude's Sanctuary had settled into a quiet, orderly routine. The 32 orphans grew healthier on steady meals, Leo's ribs had healed completely without leaving a limp, and the 4 District 5 scavengers I had beaten in the mud were now regular volunteer firewood splitters. Under the cover of my daily chores, I spent every night on the high stone roof, quietly testing and refining my copied wine to water hatsu. I practiced micro-transmutation, healing small cuts on my own fingers and absorbing the tiny stings of pain to condition my dual soul threshold. My physical vessel was growing. Turning 13 in the harsh climate of the dump, my reflexes were sharper, my Zetsu was as silent as a grave, and my aura channels were widening day by day. Then, on a freezing, fog-laden December morning, the perimeter boundary hummed. The boundary ping. 5:45 a.m. I was down in the courtyard carrying 2 heavy wooden buckets of well water when my passive Gyo picked up a faint, familiar frequency 300 meters past the eastern iron gate. It wasn't an aggressive aura. It was a dark, suffocating density that moved through the thick morning mist like a silent phantom, a presence so perfectly contained that to an ordinary person, he would have seemed invisible. I set the water buckets down without making a splash, the cold air swirling around my breath. Kale. Returning signal, Instructor Kael. Time elapsed, approximately 5 months. Threat status, 0 active tail, Syndicate pursuit line completely severed. Physical state, battle-worn, high-density aura suppression active. Father Thomas stepped out onto the porch, clutching a wooden mug of steaming black tea, his eyes instantly tracking my gaze toward the fog-covered gate. He's back, isn't he? Thomas grunted softly, taking a slow sip. Yeah, I replied, pulling my heavy poncho tight over my shoulders. He's alone. The rusted iron gate groaned on its hinges. A tall figure stepped through the swirling frost into the chapel courtyard. The report. Instructor Kale looked like he had walked straight out of a winter battlefield in hell. His long dark coat was torn at the hem, caked in dried grey mud, frost, and dark crimson stains from the outer badlands. His face was leaner, his sharp jawline covered in dark stubble, and his pitch-black eyes carried that cold, distant hollow look of a hunter who had spent months doing nothing but hunting, killing, and erasing traces in the snow. Yet, despite the exhaustion, his posture remained as rigid as an iron blade. He stopped 10 feet away from me, his sharp gaze sweeping over my frame, taking in my steady breathing, my balanced stance, and the total lack of aura leaking from my body. "Ren," Kale's raspy voice cut through the freezing air. "Instructor," I nodded smoothly, keeping my voice calm. "Report." "Sanctuary perimeter maintained at 100%, I answered clearly, matching his cold, disciplined tone. 32 civilian orphans secured. 0 syndicate infiltrations into District 4. Minor local scavenger incursions neutralized without casualties. Kale's eyes shifted slightly toward Father Thomas, who gave a lazy 2-finger salute from the porch. The kid held the line. "Kale," Thomas grunted, blowing a cloud of steam into the cold air. "Even took down a few stray dogs and kept my chapel from getting burnt to the ground." Kale stayed silent for 3 long seconds. Then, the razor-sharp tension radiating from his shoulders eased by a fraction of an inch, the subtle relaxation of a master who knew his apprentice hadn't failed him. "Good," Kale said softly. "The syndicate network in Yorknew has lost our trail entirely. The purge teams sent into Zone 9 were liquidated. The line back to District 4 is dead." "The inspection." Kale stepped closer, stopping directly in front of me. He reached out his gloved, frost-covered hand and placed his palm against my shoulder. A micro-thread of his gyo swept through my body in an instant, inspecting my aura channels, my node density, and my physical foundation. I held my Zetsu steady, letting him scan my public profile as an exceptional defensive enhancer, while keeping my hidden specialist library buried deep within the core of my dual soul. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly in genuine surprise. "Your aura channels have widened by 15%, Kale noted, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Your Zetsu. It hasn't leaked a single thread in 5 months. I didn't slack off while you were gone," I said, a faint, confident smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. Kale let out a rare, low exhale that almost sounded like approval. He reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy leather pouch tied with an iron cord, tossing it straight at my chest. "Catch." I grabbed the pouch. It clinked with the heavy, metallic ring of high-grade mainland currency and refined hunter badges. "Your pay for 5 months of perimeter guard duty," Kale said, turning his back toward the chapel entrance. "Rest today, Ren. Starting tomorrow, your true training resumes." I held the heavy pouch in my hand, watching my master walk toward the church doors where Sister Elena was already standing with a basin of hot water and a clean towel. The 5 months of waiting were over. The Badlands were clear, and as winter settled deep over Meteor City, the next phase of my journey was about to begin. Chapter 53: Status and Progression. Location: St. Jude's Sanctuary, District 4. Timeline: early December 1986. Specialist Library: Oakhaven Aegis and Wine to Water active. Next objective: Advanced Combat Training and Hatsu Mastery under Kale. Chapter 54: The Return to the Known World. Late December 1986, the Border Gate. The heavy iron gates of St. Jude's Sanctuary creaked open one last time. The morning air was crisp and freezing, the ground dusted with fresh snow. Standing in the courtyard were 32 children waving frantically, Leo standing at the front with a clean forehead scar, and Sister Elena wiping her eyes on her apron. "Take care of yourself, Ren," Leo yelled, cupping his hands. Don't forget to eat properly. Come back and visit. Thank you, Ren. Thank you, Mr. Kale. The younger kids chorused, their voices echoing off the stone chapel walls. Sister Elena stepped forward, wrapping a thick, hand-knitted woolen scarf around my neck. Her warm, gentle hands patted my cheeks. May the Lord protect your steps, child. You brought warmth to this place when we needed it most. Thank you, sister, I said softly, bowing my head with genuine respect. For the soup, and for keeping Father Thomas in line. Thomas stood leaning against the porch pillar, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. He gave me a lazy, crooked grin and a brief nod. Keep your eyes open out there in the big world, kid. Don't go picking fights you don't need to win. I adjusted my backpack, falling into step behind Instructor Kale as we turned toward the dusty road leading out of District 4. Kale, Thomas, and Sister Elena. I thought, looking back one last time at the chapel spire against the grey sky. What an absurd, incredible combination. The bet and the secret exchange. As we walked past the outer scrap mounds, I noticed Thomas holding a surprisingly thick canvas pouch that Kale had handed him right before we departed. I trotted up beside Kale, tilting my head. Instructor, did you just give Father Thomas a fortune in mainland hunter funds? Kale didn't slow his pace, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. It was a charity donation for the sanctuary's winter supplies. What I didn't know, and what neither of them would ever admit to my face, was that the massive sum of money was actually the settlement of a secret bet between Kale and Thomas from 5 months ago. The secret benchmark bet. Subject: how long before Ren snaps and uses bad language under stress? Father Thomas, bet less than 1 month. Instructor Kale, bet more than 1 month, knowing Ren survived Ging's insane wilderness conditioning without cracking once. Result: THOMAS 1. Payout: Kale paid out in full. Kale had lost the bet purely because he underestimated the true, terrifying destructive power of Sister Elena's broomstick. Furthermore, during Kale's brief stop at the sanctuary, the two former veterans had conducted a quiet, high-level intelligence exchange behind closed doors. 1. Kale's intel. He provided Thomas with a detailed map of syndicate troop movements and black market trade routes in adjacent districts, giving St. Jude's a bulletproof early warning system to protect the orphans. 2. Thomas's report. In return, Thomas handed Kale a comprehensive, highly detailed log of my mental state, combat development, and behavioral progress over the past 5 months. Kale had chosen me for this mission not just because I was an unregistered hunter with an impenetrable defensive hatsu. Deep down, Kale knew I was far too mature, far too calculating, and far too detached for a 12-year-old child. He had deliberately sent me to Meteor City so I would see how the world really worked, to witness the raw suffering of abandoned children, to feel the warmth of a genuine home like Street Jude's, and to learn what it truly meant to protect human life before I stepped into the dark waters of the hunter's world. The question. December 28, 1986, the mainland base. 2 days later, we cleared the border checkpoints and arrived back at Kale's private estate on the outskirts of the mainland metropolis. After 5 months of sleeping on stone ledges and eating barley stew, taking a long hot shower and putting on clean civilian clothes felt like entering a different dimension. The warmth of the room, the soft mattress, and the quiet comfort were a stark contrast to the frozen garbage heaps of Meteor City. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, sipping hot tea while staring at the flames. Kale walked into the study, setting a heavy wooden training dummy by the wall. He stood near the window, looking out over the snow-covered courtyard, his long coat hanging neatly on the rack. "You've rested enough, Ren," Kale said flatly, his voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. I looked up from my tea. Yes, instructor. Kale turned his sharp, pitch-black eyes toward me, resting his hand on his sword belt. The hunter exam begins in 2 weeks, in early January 1987, Kale said quietly, his tone laced with heavy significance. You have the physical foundation. Your Zetsu passed inspection in the dump. Your defensive Hatsu is established, and your mind understands the weight of this world. He paused, letting the silence stretch across the warm room. So, Ren, will you take the hunter exam in 1987? Chapter 55, The Edge of the Blade. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the study walls. I set my teacup down on the wooden table, the delicate clink breaking the heavy silence of the room. I stood up from my chair, my spine straightening with the absolute, unyielding posture of a seasoned operator disguised in a 13-year-old vessel. I'll take it, I said, my voice steady, clear, and devoid of a single trace of hesitation. Kale didn't smile. A master of his caliber didn't need to. But the razor-sharp intensity in his dark eyes softened by an imperceptible fraction, the quiet pride of a mentor watching his weapon finally sharpen itself into a blade. Good, Kale muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. The hunter exam is not a test of strength alone. It is a meat grinder designed to weed out those who think survival is a guarantee. If you fail, you die. If you hesitate, you die. I don't plan on doing either, I replied calmly. The inventory of a candidate. As Kale turned to leave the room to prepare the logistics for our departure, I stood by the fireplace and ran a final, silent mental diagnostic of my capabilities. Heading into the 1987 hunter exam, my toolkit was fully locked, loaded, and balanced. Hunter exam readiness checklist. Physical vessel, 13 years old, heightened reflexes, bone density, and stamina forged in Ging's harsh wilderness and Meteor City. Passive stealth, pinnacle tier Zetsu, ghost level suppression capable of evading elite NEN users and future troop members. Active HATSU pool 2/3 SLOTS occupied. 1. Oakhaven Aegis, absolute defensive kinetic barrier and impact redirection. Shield. 2. Wine to water, transmuted cellular healing matrix, high risk, reward. Pain transfer recovery mechanism for severe injuries. 3. Empty slot, reserved for adaptive tactical acquisition during the exam. Mental fortitude, dual soul transmigrator consciousness, immune to standard. Psychological warfare, panic, or moral hesitation. I had the defense to weather any physical storm. I had the healing to survive fatal trauma. I had the stealth to move like a ghost through crowded, hostile environments. And above all, I had the cold, calculated mindset of someone who already knew the brutal reality of the world beyond the exam gates. I clenched my right hand into a fist, feeling the dense, quiet hum of 10 wrapping securely around my knuckles. Let the examiners try whatever they want, I thought, a quiet, confident smirk touching the corners of my mouth. I was ready for the 1987 hunter exam. End of SCASON 1. Confidential field log. Ree Street. Jude's perimeter decoy. Logging officer, Thomas Vance. Subject, Ren. Evaluation period, July 1986 to December 1986. Part 1. Combat and NEN development. 1. ZETSU efficiency. The kid is a ghost, sustains 100% Zetsu for 14 plus hours on the chapel roof. Without a single aura tremor or heat leak. CRITICALNOTE, passed visual and aura inspection by Krolo Lusilfa. And 2 active troop operatives. Neither perceived him as a non-combatant until physical contact was initiated. 2. Defensive Hatsu, Okavan Aegis. Flawless kinetic absorption and redirection. Successfully parried multiple raw enhancement strikes from Fink's Magcub, without suffering structural limb damage or breaking his civilian posture. Suppressishi's output effortlessly to mimic non-nen martial arts when dealing with low-tier scavengers. 0 unnecessary energy waste. 3. Physical and combat tactics. Disarms and neutralizes street-level targets without lethal force. Spatial awareness in confined alleyways is preternatural. Fights purely on efficiency, no flashy moves, no wasted steps, 0 ego. Part 2. MENTAL State and Psychological Profile. 1. Maturity and detachment. Performs like a 30-year-old hardened mercenary trapped in a 12-year-old body. Never panicked once, not during the Krolo standoff, nor during the street brawl with the troop. His heart rate remained flat-lining at 60 bpm. Shows a dangerous level of cold calculation. He calculates tactical risks in milliseconds before acting. 2. Moral compass and empathy. Despite his cold demeanor, he holds an active protective instinct toward non-combatants and children. Integrates seamlessly into civilian life when required. Peeled radishes, carried well water, and helped Elena without complaining. He doesn't kill out of bloodlust, but he won't hesitate to break a jaw if the sanctuary line is crossed. 3. THE, benchmark, bet. KAEL, you owe ME 50,000 Jenny. You claimed he wouldn't break character or curse for over a month because of Ging's wilderness training. He lasted 24 days until Elena caught him slacking on roof duty and hit him with her broomstick. He muttered 3 very colorful swear words under his breath. Pay up. Part 3. OVERALL Evaluation and Recommendation. Summary. Ren is a perfect operational success for this mission. He kept District 4 completely clean without drawing the Syndicate's attention or burning our cover. Final remarks to Kale. He's ready for the mainland, Kale. His defense is an iron wall, and his mind is sharper than half the licensed hunters running around Yorknew. But keep an eye on him. He carries a dark, heavy weight inside his head, like someone who knows how ugly the world gets before he's even lived it. He doesn't need more muscle. He needs to remember he's still allowed to be human. Signed, Father Thomas.